Hello everyone, my name is Hadal, and welcome to a retrospective analysis of the classic PlayStation 1 title, Monster Rancher 2. Apologies for the wait, it's been a rough Sisyphean few months. Without further ado, let's dig into this old legend, starting with an overview to bring our new viewing friends up to speed. The Monster Rancher series centers around generating a monster of your very own through the iconic disc swapping gimmick, and then caring for the creature in order to claim victory in tournaments of combat. Throughout the monster's lifespan, you'll increase its stats to fight, explore, learn moves, and earn money to achieve a number of goals. The main goal is to defeat the major 4 tournaments and attain the rank of Master Breeder. During their journey, in Monster Rancher 2 specifically, the player will give their attention to a single monster at a time, providing an opportunity to develop a fondness and attachment to their creature as they manage their stress, fatigue, loyalty, and other parameters. These monsters can then be combined together to create an offspring with stronger starting stats, giving them an edge as you begin the cycle anew. These combined monsters will often display characteristics of the parents, with one dictating the child's species and the other with secondary characteristics. This is denoted as main/sub. There are also secret monsters to unlock and upgrades for the ranch, giving the player additional goals to achieve. That is essentially the experience, and if that sounds appealing, stick around as we dig deep into every aspect of this game. Spoiler warning for those who wish to go in blind. Now that the basic overview is out of the way, I again need to explain how I'm going to structure this analysis because this is a tricky situation. If you want to skip ahead straight into the video, go right to the Game Start section. For the first time, I'm dealing with a sequel to a game already having its own video on this channel, so I'm posed with the question, do I approach this as if someone has never seen the first video, or do I approach it from the perspective of my current audience? Well, the answer is both, so in order to include both types of people, I'm going to cover everything again, even subjects that were covered in the Monster Rancher 1 video. It's not necessary to watch that one, but it might help provide context for this video. This is because Monster Rancher 2, or MR for short, carries over a great deal of base mechanics from the first game. For those who already watched my MR1 video, you may hear some repetition from that one. Back in the late 90s, Monster Rancher 1 didn't even release to European and PAL audiences. It was Monster Rancher 2 that first reached those players. So it's also possible that European viewers have no idea about MR1, having only played MR2. Therefore, when certain relevant subjects come up, I'll also provide a comparison detailing the change from Monster Rancher 1 to 2 and assess its quality. And of course, since these two games were bundled together as part of the DX remasters on Switch and PC, I'll be going over any changes there too. Some specific changes are best discussed when the relevant subject matter comes up, and others will be delegated to a specific section at the end, similar to the Monster Rancher 1 video. Again, this video will cover everything about Monster Rancher 2, and this time I will be getting to the more esoteric aspects to it, since there's a lot to talk about there. What I mean by that will have to wait. I don't want to spoil the mystery. But you can expect to hear about the mechanics, the world, narratives, if any, the presentation, and other elements that make up a video game. The footage you see comes from my most recent and most complete playthrough of the game, which ended up clocking in over 65 hours in total. Other experience with the game comes from playing the original console version as well, but obviously I couldn't measure that numerically. What you're seeing is actually the original vanilla game too, not the DX version, but I have played enough of the DX version on Switch to get a feel for its changes. That was about half a playthrough, roughly speaking. Other sources of information during my research include Let's Plays, the Legend Cup site again, wikis, interviews, and other videos on the game like reviews or tutorials. Unlike Monster Rancher 1, my first time playing Monster Rancher 2 was as an adult, only a few years ago at this point. So I can say with confidence that I don't have a nostalgia bias for this game. However, given my conclusions of my MR1 video, and judging by the fact that this video even exists, you can probably guess how I feel about the sequel. But do not worry, I have done as best I can to set aside any biases in the interest of honest assessment. If I get anything wrong, of course, please tell me in the comments. They really do help. Before we begin, just as a disclaimer, I use a geometry correction plugin in general when playing PS1 games on my PC. So while it makes the visuals look more stable, in my opinion, there are times where the classic PS1 polygon jitter still causes some visual weirdness. It's not the game, it's just DuckStation. Also, there is some missing footage I accidentally forgot to record. It's not much, it's just the expedition where I obtained the legitimately useless God Slate to complete the story for Dr. Talico. I have it here, as you can see. It's really not a big deal, but I figured I should mention it regardless. That's everything out of the way now, so let's dive into the continent of Ima in Monster Rancher 2. I've been told the proper name for these cinematics that play before a game's main menu are called the Attract mode, but that may only apply to arcade games. Regardless, the opening cinematic for Monster Rancher 2 is even heavier on lore than its predecessors. While the cinematic in Monster Rancher 1 established a background on where disc stones came from and what people did with them, Monster Rancher 2 tells a creation myth regarding the god of the Monster Rancher universe. The story is told via a series of animated cave paintings where humanity in an ancient age was facing some sort of volcanic disaster that destroyed crops and blackened the sky. In response to prayers for help, God created new flora and fauna, including, but not limited to, what we understand as monsters. At first glance, I wasn't sure why God would respond in this way, but it does make sense. It's simply to repopulate the planet. Unfortunately, it seems humans ended up using the monsters to wage war, and God sealed those new creatures away in the disc stones. It wasn't just monsters though, as we can see real-world animals being sealed as well. At the time, the world's land masses were merged much like real-world Pangea, and over time they split apart. Humanity has since rediscovered the disc stones and unlocked the creatures inside. We can then assume this is where the cinematic for Monster Rancher 1 takes place. I find this really interesting since the lore of the game isn't really important, yet a significant amount of thought was put into it. Like, this information isn't really relevant to the player's narrative or the gameplay. Monster Rancher 2, much like 1, is largely about the player and lacks a typical story. Monster Rancher 1 set up the basic context for the game. Monster Rancher 2 starts off by expanding the scope of the world's history or mythology. God being a giant sun face vaguely reminiscent of the galley monsters is certainly not a coincidence. In fact, the encyclopedia entry for the base galley describes it like this.
It is said that its existence is close to that of God.
And it's not just the pure galley. Other entries for galley subtype versions like the Golem, Hare, and Naga variants have entries describing them as guardian deities. So there seems to be some connection of divinity between God and the galley species. In MR1, the galley and monol species were monsters of the magic species in disguise, but I don't think that's relevant here, especially since magics don't exist in MR2. Ultimately, I'm not sure what it all means. I do get the impression that the lore of the setting is an aspect of the series that the creators do take seriously, even if it isn't very relevant to what the player actually does in-game. The other part of the cinematic shows off several monsters, new and old, in a tournament setting. They battle each other one after another, and it's all presented with a wacky and cartoony tone. Suezo looks a bit, horrifying though. Keep this cinematic in the back of your mind, we'll return to it later. Much like Monster Rancher 1, the player is inserted into the role of a fresh breeder who has recently finished their breeder exams. But this isn't Fimba, no, we're in a completely different nation now. When it comes to the governing body of monster raising here, we have IMA, which stands for the International Monster Association. I'm not sure if each nation has a real name, so I'll be referring to them by their monster associations. Ima appears to be a large island continent across the sea, while Fimba appears to be a peninsula. Much like with Fimba, there is a variety of biomes like jungle, desert, and a snowy mountain area. The player already has land, a house, and in the IMA office they are introduced to their permanent assistant. Right off the bat, the player is given a personality quiz to fill out with simple yes or no questions. The questions vary between save files, but ultimately they don't have any effect on the game. I'm not sure why they're here, perhaps to encourage the player to self-reflect. I have no idea, but sorry to burst someone's bubble, this quiz doesn't do anything, nor do your answers matter. After the quiz, the player is introduced to the assistant of the game, Kolsha, or Colt for short. She's described as being childish and hasty, but after my time in-game, I never really got that impression about her. Similar to Holly in Monster Rancher 1, there isn't a whole lot of dialogue. The translation for Monster Rancher 2 is also notoriously bad, even in the DX edition, so there may be some characterization lost in translation. However, from what I can tell, as a character, Colt seems rather tomboyish given her hairstyle and her preferred abbreviation of her name. I guess in comparison to Holly, she doesn't scold the player when they spoil or stress their monster. It's a strange thing to try and piece together. Despite all the time spent in-universe working with them, the personalities of these assistant characters always feels lacking. Colt's dialogue is mostly a method of delivering status updates and other game information to the player. She tells you about the monster's energy, their stress, birthdays, official tournament dates, and a variety of other events. These updates are very useful and I would argue vital to the gameplay, so I'm not too critical about a lack of dialogue helping flesh out Colt as a character. And I guess in retrospect that could apply to Holly in MR1 as well. But it would be nice to get a bit more characterization from these companions. Before heading out, Colt can explain more about game terminology, like what tournaments are, what the ranch does, and more importantly, the Major Four. It's a bit sudden, but now that the main goal of the game is established, the player is let out into town to get their first monster. Once outside, the player has access to the market, shrine, and the lab. Obtaining a monster is largely identical to the previous game, but the market has seen an improvement. The market is a store that gives away monsters for free, no physical disc required. The player can choose one of a selection of 3 monsters, and the third slot in this pool will change depending on the time of year. You'll always be able to get Zooms and Mochis, but the seasonal monsters include the Suezo, Arrowhead, Hare, and Gabu. This is a pretty great improvement, since the player has easy access to a bigger pool of monsters. Of course, the shrine is the main way to generate monsters, but in the rare chance a player in the 90s lacked a physical disc, they aren't stuck with only 3 monsters to choose from. Another new feature of the market is the ability to sell monsters rather than just giving them away. However, the gold you get from selling your monster is absolutely not worth it in my opinion. If your monster is too young or too old, they're worth 0 gold, which keeps the player from just selling fresh monsters over and over. But these prices are based on the species and their rank, with most monsters not even hitting a value of 1,000 gold until they're B rank or higher. You could just win a low-level tournament to earn that gold, so I genuinely don't know why anyone would do this. If you don't want a monster, it's arguably more productive just to freeze it and combine it later for whatever meager stat gains it offers. Still, the option is there, I guess, and overall the market is still useful, a noted improvement from MR1. In the spirit of this, I chose a Mochi as the first monster of this playthrough. Next, the Shrine. Generating a monster from a physical disc via the PlayStation's Disc Swap feature is arguably the most remembered and celebrated feature of the series, and nothing has really changed about it here. The monster you receive is based on the track length data on the CD, with some special CDs containing themed monsters. Since playing the original game or DX version on PC doesn't work with CDs, at least as far as I know, I've used the Make a Monster tool in the Legend Cup site in order to make dummy files for the monsters I want to use. It even features a randomizer function and the ability to hide the names of the monsters in the files in order to preserve the mystery and excitement of using a new CD. In the DX version, the CD function is replaced with a song selection database that has a similar randomizing feature. I argued this in the Monster Rancher 1 video, but I'll say it again. The CD gimmick was always just a method of obtaining a monster, and while yes, not being able to do that on the DX editions isn't the same as the original game on console, I don't think it's a big loss. It doesn't inhibit your ability to play the game. In fact, not being limited to your CD collection lets you try out all monsters the game offers, assuming of course you've unlocked them. Maybe one day Koei Tecmo will add a feature to import your Spotify playlists or something. A new feature has been added where you can generate a monster from a slate, which the kids call slating. I guess the PlayStation 1 memory card does kind of look like a stone slate. It's basically just importing monster data from a Monster Rancher 1 save file into Monster Rancher 2. The way my saves are set up doesn't work for this feature, so I didn't make use of it, admittedly. But what I can tell you is that slating generates a monster from the Monster Rancher 1 freezer, but this isn't a direct transfer. If your monster has, say, high stats, the game will generate it as a fresh baby monster, but with boosted initial stats, much like a combination. The previous name will be its default, but this can be changed. Certain species like the Magic, Doodle, and the Disc don't exist in MR2, so those species are changed into a Bajarl variant, Scribble Monol variant, and a special Niton variant. The dinos of Monster Rancher 1 also become Zoom monsters. These changed species are changed into something that is still relevant to their previous identity. Stardust Wyvern also has a couple of handy guides that explain this more in detail. Links will be in the description. Well hell, since I've shown their main species, I should probably go ahead and introduce the new monster arrivals to Monster Rancher 2. In hindsight, I wish I'd done this for the previous video, so I'm doing it for the new monsters now because, well, it's fun. But expect just some personal commentary from me. To start, The arrowhead is a large crustacean creature somewhere in between a lobster and a crab. They have great defense and frankly, look rad as hell. Bajarl are a genie-like monster with two forms. One is a little humanoid chibi guy, and in battle he bulks up into his battle form. They also travel around in a little four-legged pot. Bajarls have good power and speed, and rely a lot on upgrading their techniques to get access to their full kit. Baku are large furry monsters resembling a mix between a dog and a cow. They kinda remind me of Falcor from the Neverending Story, but their models in Monster Hunter 2 look absolutely cursed. Their eyeballs stick out of their head in such a weird way. The Baku models in later games look a lot less gross. The monsters themselves boost high life, power, and defense, so they're stronger than they look. Beaklins are large beetle monsters with beefy arms and good attitudes. They boast good power, speed, and defense, making them pretty dependable in my experience. Definitely one of the cooler additions. What a good dude. And then there's the color Pandora. Ew! Talk about cursed. What do I even say? It's like someone put a clown's face on a piece of Hubba Bubba Max and stuck them together ass to mouth, human centipede style. They move around and fight like a caterpillar as one creature. They have good life and skill, and have some moves that cause self-damage when you miss. The Centaur is a monster with a horse's lower body, and in place of the typical human torso on top like you'd expect in real-world mythology, in MR2 he has a bird-like head with green skin. They also wield spears and staves as weapons. Very strange, but good skill and speed. Ducken are toy-like monsters with duck features and a body split into 3 pieces. They're quite colorful and are incredibly cute. I mean, come on, just look at him. They have great skill and speed, and I've never been disappointed raising one. The Durahan is a suit of floating armor, complete with a knightly helm, despite their name, as well as a sword and shield. Both mechanically and in appearance, they seem built for combat. Durahans have good power, skill, and defense, but many of them have somewhat evil dispositions. Gabu are monsters made from a clay-like substance and can extend their arms and legs to attack. They look mean and kinda ugly, but most of them actually have pretty positive dispositions. They also boast great life, power, and speed. Hoppers are monsters resembling a mix of chinchillas and kangaroos with big googly eyes. These little stinkers often have bad attitudes, very high speed, low defenses, and generally low damage techniques. They seem especially suited to glass cannon builds that dodge well and time their opponent out. Jill is a species of rare monsters with a yeti-like appearance. They're covered with long fur that hides their limbs and command icy powers. Their best stats are power and intelligence, making them versatile but not specialized. Jokers are truly evil monsters.
Deep, dark fantasies.
They're basically floating ghostly robes with creepy clown masks and wielding giant scythes. They have one of the most negative starting dispositions, but also have incredible intelligence and skill, making them great for dealing damage, but low defenses make them fairly squishy. Goddamn are they cool. Kato are fat, lazy cats that look like old sages, complete with smoking and drinking habits. They generally have bad attitudes, but live a hell of a long time, with good speed and intelligence stats. Very low power though. Generally considered the best monster in the game, Metalner is a robotic monster resembling a UFO. They have incredible defense and skill, with great moves to offset their initial low damage stats. In battle, they have great guts regeneration rates. Mochi are cutesy, Kappa-like creatures and have made Suezo share its spot as mascot of the series. They're very well-rounded with good skill, making for a good starting monster. Never really liked them, but after using a couple, they've certainly grown on me. Mach are a species of monsters with the forms of dead trees. They look a little spooky and live a long time. They strike me as being particularly suited for expeditions since they have good intelligence and good starting life, though its stat gains in life are terrible. Nitons are creatures with aspects of squids, jellyfish, and the real-world nautilus. They look rather silly with their googly eyes, but they have great defense and stinging tentacles. The Phoenix is just that, a phoenix. It's a rare monster boasting great intelligence and frankly looks majestic as hell. Not much else to say. Undines are a race of humanoid mermaid creatures that appear to be made of water. The Undine is a glass cannon kind of monster with high intelligence for damage, good skill, and good speed, but low power and defensive stats in general. Rakis are a strange monster. Designed very obviously to be a reference to Chucky, they're a possessed doll wielding a razor or knife. They have very negative dispositions, have some of the worst starting stats aside from intelligence and speed, but they also have the longest lifespans in the game to balance that. And finally we have the Zilla, a massive unit of a monster with the form of a bipedal furry whale. Very obviously a Godzilla reference, and boasting strong power and life. You might be asking why I didn't mention the zoom, and that's because it's basically a redesigned dino from Monster Rancher 1. Slating a dino will even give you a zoom, as I said before. So whether I consider it a new monster is iffy, and I've got mixed feelings about it. While I do think they look more cool and less goofy than their more cartoonish predecessors, I feel like some of their charm has been lost. Maybe I'd prefer it if their heads weren't always so close to the ground. It would give the zoom a more alert look. And as I said before, some monsters didn't make it over to the second game entirely. The magic is gone, doodles are gone, as well as the incredibly rare disc monsters. But you know, this really isn't that bad. Monster Rancher 1 had 20 species in total, and Monster Rancher 2 has a total of 38. That's a lot of monsters added, especially when you consider the available combinations. By far, Monster Rancher 2 has a bigger selection, so I'm not too hung up about the 3 lost species. It could have been a lot worse. So far, we've only been in the game's only town, but once you get your monster and head to the ranch, you'll see more of the game environment. It's a notable difference in style compared to Monster Rancher 1. I don't mean in-universe either. Both Fimba and Ima resemble a pre-industrial European nation, to the point where if it wasn't explicitly stated, you could forgive the inattentive player for mistaking them as the same nation. No, we're talking about the game itself. Monster Rancher 2 goes for a mostly 3D game environment, from the buildings to the landscape and the props of the world. Monster Rancher 1 was a mostly sprite-based game, with 3D monster models imposed on top of them, at least until you entered tournaments. Monster Rancher 2 still has a lot of sprite work, and still has that aged historical look complementing the pre-industrial setting. It's just that 3D polygons and more saturated colors have become the dominant look. Character portraits and the windowed event artwork are still sprites, of course. Considering that this game was originally released in 1999, only 2 years after the original, it's expected that the 3D environments are rather simplistic. They rely on textures over their 3D models to show detail on surfaces. This does mean the environments themselves, especially on the ranch, are simple. Instead of being basically a painting, each prop and object is given a model or flat sprite. I don't really consider it a downgrade or even bad, just different. This game is in one of those periods in gaming history where technology was still growing rapidly, and you can see it when comparing Monster Rancher 1 and 2. A lot of the 3D models for the monsters in MR1 were brought back for 2, with a few exceptions. Pixies, gels, dragons, and golems got changes of some sort in their look. Pixies seem to be the least changed. I want to say it's the original model with slightly shorter legs. To me, it makes them look a little strange. With Gel, you can notice an immediate difference in the arms and torso. They made it look bulkier and hunched over. Dragons have shorter horns, shorter but thicker necks, and a smoother torso. Golems look very different, with a completely different head, bigger eyes, different proportions, and the stones that make up their body are tightly packed. The change to golems honestly breaks my heart a little. They've lost a lot of their intimidating look that they had in Monster Rancher 1. Certain species of monster, like the Duckin and the Undine, have stray pixels that sit deep below their actual model. However, for some reason, you can see them through the ground. Harmless, if a bit distracting. The only explanation I can think of is that Duckin and Undine use props in certain attacks, like missiles and arrows, and these models are shrunk down. They're placed under the ground until needed for an animation, and for some reason they appear through the ground. Overall, the monsters in Monster Rancher 2 have great personality, much like the first game. You've got the usual animations to be expected, such as eating, resting, reaction to items, their likes, dislikes, praise and punishment, and the constant motion that helps sell these 3D models as living creatures to our eyes. What's neat about having a fully 3D environment is that your monster can walk around your ranch, playing or amusing itself. Just let the menu sit for a while and watch as the monster just does its own thing. However, I do have some issues. Since all of the drills, errantry, and mini events take place in a 3D environment, some shortcuts were made to accommodate all these different monster species. Let's take the basic domino drill. Every monster will do an animation to strike the first domino, unless they cheat, and do an animation expressing their level of success. There's an animation for being disappointed at failing, being triumphant at succeeding, or extra triumphant when they get a great success. Every monster will have a different animation for each of these actions depending on the outcome, but they are meant to express the same emotion. For example, a galley's rest animation is very different from an ape's. And as you repeatedly do these activities over and over with different monsters, you'll likely start to notice a sort of underlying template to the activity. What I mean is that there's a predetermined series of general actions every monster is programmed to perform in reaction to events in the drills, errand trees, or whatever. Compared to Monster Rancher 1, where each species had their own animations for doing tasks. It was often the same general job or training, but these animations often involved the monster completing them in a unique way appropriate to the monster. Perhaps this is due to the sheer amount of new monsters, but this templating is noticeable. Sometimes it can look rather goofy. Like, let's look at this scene with my Tiger Naga. I've just returned from an errand tree with the intention of unlocking the Centaur. There's a scene where the Centaur is stalking my ranch to retrieve its spear, and my monster is alerted to its presence. Look how the alert animation looks. This is certainly the most awkward example I found during my playtime, but the game has a lot of awkward moments when it has to account for many monster species doing the same actions. This awkwardness also extends to attack animations in battle. A lot of them are fine, with a good sense of force behind the attack. Good hit sounds also add to this. However, some attacks have really sluggish movement or strange delays that evaporate that feeling of force. It's especially felt with Golem. By comparison, Monster Rancher 1 had some great attack animations. They were often snappy, quick, and felt forceful to me. Overall, despite those issues, Monster Rancher 2 still hits what I think is most important, giving the monsters personality. I want to be clear about that. I know I've mostly been describing criticisms, but these are just specific examples. Generally speaking, the game's visuals are perfectly fine. As I've said before, the game still succeeds in what's really important for making the monsters feel real. We've taken a tangent, so let's get back to what you'll work with at the ranch. At the start of each month, you'll have to feed your monster. Feeding has been expanded in Monster Rancher 2, with more food types added and more nuance in how useful each item is. There's still an overall best food item and an overall worst, but it isn't so cut and dry like Monster Rancher 1. Meat doesn't give lifespan anymore, for one. Money requires more management this time around, so cheaper foods might be preferable until you can build up more reserves of gold. At their core, all foods manipulate hidden stats that affect your monster's stress level, their loyalty to you, and how fat or skinny they are. Certain monster species prefer different foods, and picking a food they like will increase the benefits. Disliked foods will diminish those benefits, or can cause negative effects. For example, baby monsters in their very early life stages are more likely than an adult to prefer milk. Some monsters prefer a cheaper food item than the expensive stuff, so it could be worth it to give them their preferred food and still get comparable stress reductions to more expensive food. Generally speaking, the more expensive the food, the better it is for your monster's stress and loyalty. Whether or not you want a fat or skinny monster is another issue. The trade-off is, of course, being able to maintain the diet. Unlike Monster Rancher 1, the basic drills do not give you income, so starting out you have to be careful with food expenses, among other things. The scale goes from potato, milk, fish, cup jelly, meat, and finally tablets. Tablets are by far the best food for any monster, even if they don't like it, but they are 500 gold a month. Potatoes are the cheapest, but only monsters that like them will get any positive benefits from them. Those positive benefits are minuscule at best. In my experience, the cheapest you should go when it comes to food is cup jelly at minimum, and let me explain why. Cup jelly is a fairly inexpensive 150 gold to start, but you can make a slow profit by feeding it to your monster. Sometimes you'll get a diamond mark on the inside lid. Collecting 5 will get you a prize, as Colt says. I cannot wait to get all. The prize is a duckin' doll, which has several uses. Initially, you can only partially assemble it. After you obtain the strong glue item from an expedition, you can assemble it as a complete item and use it to unlock the duckin' species. But alternatively, it can be sold for a tasty 3,000 gold, more than enough to cover the cost of actually buying the food. Eventually, once you can afford a lifetime supply of it, I recommend switching to tablets or even meat, since the benefits are just that good. Now that your monster has food in their belly, it's time to start raising it. But how should you raise it? What do all the stats even do? Colt can roughly explain them, but allow me to do a better job. The nature of each individual stat might not affect the ranch directly, but you do increase them through the ranch, so I'm including them here. Your monster's basic stats, the ones they'll be grinding for throughout their life, number at 6. They are life, power, intelligence, skill, speed, and defense. With the exception of life, these also have levels every 50 points that affect certain calculations, at least in the original game. In the DX edition, stats are calculated around every increment of 12.5 points. I'm not sure what levels really mean anymore, but this does allow the player to be more flexible with their training. Focusing on raising stats 50 points at a time will probably forever be burned into my brain, but at least you aren't forced into that for the sake of progression anymore. Life is like your hit points. When it reaches 0 in battle, your monster is KO'd. It can also serve as a defensive stat in battle, since high life means you can absorb more damage. The new expeditions have also made a much more valuable stat in MR2. Expeditions treat life as a stamina resource for your monster, and is consumed as you explore, attempt to remove obstacles, or investigate points of interest. Power and intelligence serve as your damage dealing stats. Physical techniques are yellow and are governed by power, while magical or special techniques are green and governed by intelligence. In Monster Rancher 2, these stats were also rebalanced to have a defensive quality to them as well. Higher power will reduce the damage of incoming power attacks, and the same goes for intelligence with its own damage type. Outside of battle, power is used in expeditions to remove obstacles, and intelligence helps find hidden paths and items. Skill is a stat that affects your monster's accuracy in battle. This is a very important stat, since missing attacks can be very punishing. I'll explain later when we get deeper into combat. There is one skill-based requirement for unlocking the Joker Mask in expeditions, but it is a largely battle-focused stat. It does not, however, increase your monster's guts regen rate, which was an unfortunate example of misinformation that I had believed unquestioningly for a long time. Speed is the inverse to skill. With a higher speed, your monster will dodge attacks easier. It doesn't affect how quickly your monster moves back and forth in the battle arenas. That is also misinformation. And finally, defense. This stat mitigates incoming damage, very simple, and very effective when combined with a high life stat. It's largely believed that defense was considered overpowered in Monster Rancher 1, so in 2 it was nerfed somewhat, and defensive capabilities were added to power and intelligence. In general, this stat system is pretty solid. Having only 6 stats, it is pretty simple, but I would say that simplicity also makes it easier to balance. Each stat has a basic two-way counter, such as defense and life working in tandem to absorb the damage dealt by either power or intelligence, not to mention the defensive qualities that power and intelligence offer against themselves. Because of this, power and intelligence also counter each other, since many monster builds will focus on one or the other, providing a weakness to be exploited. This is doubly so, given how using guts to deal damage can open you up to damage yourself, which I will explain later. Speed and skill also counter each other as well in a more direct manner, like a tug of war. Skill makes it easier to hit opponents, and the opponent's speed makes that more difficult. Honestly, the only way you can be completely safe is to get every stat to the maximum of 999, at least in theory. It's entirely possible to achieve too. There are several guides on how to do just that, with the caveat that those methods require a lot of preparation and resources, not to mention the potential tedium of adhering to those schedules. But I imagine most players will end up leaning into a specialization of some kind with their monster, especially since monsters themselves have their own natural inclinations with certain stats. While not every monster is created equal, the core stat system itself is pretty balanced, and I'm convinced that the changes made from Monster Rancher 1 are positive overall. Anyway, that's the main 6, but there are plenty more other stats, and many don't have a colorful bar to visualize. Fame is not one of those stats, as it does in fact have a colorful bar that fills. Fame was largely a flavor stat previously, but in Monster Rancher 2 it has some more effects on the gameplay. Most importantly, each expedition location has a specific fame threshold to reach before the NPC who invites you will visit your ranch. Having a nearly maxed fame stat of 90 or higher is also the first step to unlocking the Raki monster. And your monster's critical hit rate goes up the higher your fame stat, but to be honest, I didn't really notice this much. Turns out it's a single percent for every 10 fame, so at 100 fame, it's only a 10% increase. You'll notice this little sign labeled Style, and this refers to where you are on the scale between spoiling your monster and treating it strictly. The scale is affected by two hidden stats, spoil and fear, which I hope doesn't need explanation on which extreme they pull towards. The scale goes from doting to even to Spartan, with varying labels in between. Cult will actually give you status messages on whether you're spoiling your monster or stressing them out, and without jumping too far ahead, it's generally good practice to keep your style at even, at least if you want your monster to live a decently long time. Form refers to another descriptive value that represents your monster's weight. Rigorous training, frequent resting, certain foods, and special items can make your monster either skinnier or fatter. I'm sad to say that unlike the first game, the status does not make your monster's model look physically thinner or chubbier. However, there is a very significant effect on stats. Being fat can invisibly increase a monster's defense, while a skinny monster will have its speed increase. This boost can go up to a max of 25% of the current stat, which is quite significant. But the effective stat value can't exceed the max of 999. Still, I found the effects of form to be very useful when manipulated on purpose. A monster's nature is initially set by its main species and subtype in tandem. Some monsters are at base more benevolent or wicked. In Monster Rancher 1, these dispositions didn't really exist as natures. The stat that acted similarly was the invisible seriousness stat, which was removed in place of the nature system. Natures, like form and style, manifest as labels representing a range of values on a hidden numerical scale. The scale goes from best to neutral to worst, and a monster's nature can affect different things. For one, a monster with a bad nature is more likely to fail or even cheat on their drills. Cheats are a new outcome with your basic training methods, where the monster still gets a lesser amount of stats, but the player is given an opportunity to punish or forgive the monster. This choice further affects the monster's nature, where punishment influences them towards a better nature, and forgiving them towards a worse nature. But when I describe a good or bad nature, these are not judgmental terms, I'm speaking in game terms. A specific nature, either good or bad, can be desirable depending on the situation. The vast majority of monsters in this game have at least one attack they can learn that requires meeting a certain nature requirement, and oftentimes a very powerful one. Nature can be influenced positively or negatively through choices like praising or punishing your monster, or through items, so you can definitely hit those requirements before changing your monster back, if you wish. These attacks are collectively referred to as techniques, or techs for short. Monsters start off with a few basic type techs that usually do low damage, but don't cost a lot of guts to use in battle. Techs are largely the same from Monster Rancher 1, with the same attributes of force, hit percentage, withering, and sharpness, just with different names this time. They also still use the same E to S scaling system. Force refers to the damage rating, hit percentage refers to the attack's accuracy, withering refers to how much of the opponent's guts is damaged when hit, and sharpness refers to the critical hit rate. A new addition to the technique system is the ability to upgrade your monster's attacks. You see, each monster species has upgrade moves in their pool that can be unlocked. For example, the Galley has an attack called Firewall. It's a solid intelligence hit tech, meaning that it prioritizes high accuracy over damage. If I have my Galley use Firewall 50 times in its life, it can go on another errand tree to learn the upgraded attack, Blaze Wall. This move costs more guts, but is more powerful, more accurate, and does more withering damage. This move can be used another 50 times to unlock a special tech called Napalm, which does even more damage and withering, at a slight downgrade in accuracy compared to Blaze Wall. There's a few more technique upgrade paths like this in Galley's move pool, but you'll find these in the move pools of the other monsters as well. Using two specific moves over 50 times each within a single monster's lifespan is a very difficult task, so fortunately if that monster is combined and the child is of the same species, those counts are transferred to the child. In my experience, it isn't necessary to obtain these upgraded moves to beat the game, but they're a useful goal to pursue, especially if the player wants to push their monster's power to the limit. Monster Rancher 1 didn't have this system, only the ability to inherit techniques onto child monsters, so I think it adds a healthy layer of complexity to monster building. One that rewards the player for combining monsters within the same species, since oftentimes the novelty of a different main species can dissuade that. I have to criticize one aspect of it though. It's a problem that the player isn't really informed about the system of counting your attack uses and unlocked stronger evolutions of attacks. At most, the errantry clerk will say there's a chance of learning a new move, but there's no information on what the requirements for learning a new move are, whether it's an upgrade tech, one requiring a high enough stat, or one dependent on nature. "It seems there is some chance to acquire a new technique here," is too vague of a statement. Since there's a menu for looking at the possible wild monsters you might encounter, I don't think it's unreasonable for there to be a menu showing the list of possible techs at this location. You could list the requirements and even hide the name if you wanted it to be mysterious. Overall, of course, it is still my belief that the tech system in Monster Rancher 2 is an upgrade from the previous title, which should be the standard for sequels in general, at least in an ideal world. The loyalty stat in Monster Rancher 2 works very much the same as in 1, but the mechanics that influence the stat have been changed to a very noticeable effect. Loyalty is still a representation of a balance between the fear and spoil stats. Generally speaking, punishing or working your monster hard contributes to fear, while praising, forgiving, resting, or feeding your monster treats contributes to spoil. Raising and maintaining your monster's loyalty, however, requires a lot more effort on the player's part this time. In Monster Rancher 1, loyalty was very easy to raise and keep at 100 as the monster aged. Scorpion Dust, the item that boosts loyalty, was not kept from Monster Rancher 2. Food items are now the primary way of raising loyalty, which is why tablets are so good, but it's not so simple. At base, without items to mitigate its buildup, stress seems like it's a lot quicker to accumulate on your monster, and monsters of a bad nature will get more stress from being punished, while also generally having a higher chance of running away. If a monster is hospitalized due to sickness or injury, its loyalty to you will also take a big hit. Without resources and knowledge of hidden aspects of the game, I really found it difficult initially to keep my monster's loyalty above 90. It was through a combination of items and a meticulous training regimen that loyalty stopped being an issue, namely the famous no rest method, but to explain further would be getting ahead of myself. I've been showing and explaining specific statistics and pieces of information the game gives the player, but I should also explain the purpose of the data windows these come from. The data window is accessed via a shortcut and displays all the information we just talked about. Much like in Monster Rancher 1, I found myself checking it constantly to plan my monster's training, so it's handy to have it accessible at the touch of a button. You can also access monster cards, which are the Monster Rancher 2's equivalent of an encyclopedia. Here you can get some flavor text about the monsters as well as access a model viewer. I always like these sorts of bestiary/encyclopedia type of things in games, happy to see it here too. These games are, of course, all about the monsters, training them, caring for them, and for some growing attached to them. Moving on, every player will have to interact with the training aspect of the game. It's quite literally the primary gameplay activity, and undoubtedly one of the biggest appeals of not only Monster Rancher, but this genre as a whole. Training is split into two activities, drills and errantry. It's the same as Monster Rancher 1, just some name changes. But compared to Monster Rancher 1, drills do not give the player income. In the previous game, these drills were contextualized as sending your monsters on various jobs for a week, receiving payment for services rendered. In the sequel, these drills are just as described. You are training your monster in the most literal sense. That means the player is not receiving a steady source of income. This adds a higher level of challenge to growing your finances, since the player is entirely dependent on winning tournaments and selling items from expeditions to get by. One might say that the effective reimbursement for feeding your monster cup jelly does the same thing, but I would remind them that you need 5 diamond marks to receive the fun can, and it's entirely luck based on when you get a mark. You only get one chance, the beginning of each month, so at minimum it takes 5 months to get all 5 marks, plus an additional month for shipping. I've gone several months between diamond marks too. Keep in mind that this is assuming you aren't buying any items whatsoever, nor sending your monster on errantries. Even if you get absolutely perfect luck with diamond marks, costing you 900 gold in cup jelly over 6 months with no other expenses, that is only a profit of 2100 gold over a period of 6 months. That's barely enough for one errantry at regular price. In Monster Rancher 1, 6 months of light drills, a fish diet, and say, 1 weekly rest would net you a guaranteed profit of 2400 gold.
Hey there, everybody. This is Hadal in the editing cage after the fact and unscripted. You're probably thinking, man, dude, you're bad at math, and you're right. As you've probably easily guessed, 200 gold a month over 6 months is not 2,400 gold. That is actually 1,200. I don't know why I was calculating it for a full 12 months. So yeah, my math on this point is completely wrong. It would actually take 11 months to make the same amount of gold that the duck and doll method, at perfect luck, admittedly, would make. So the conclusion to that point was that Monster Rancher 1 money is more easy to come by. While that's still true, this is wrong, but the conclusion is still right for different reasons. Namely, the fact that you can actually get a consistent income while getting income from tournaments in Monster Rancher 1, while in Monster Rancher 2, all you have to go off is the tournaments. And like I said, with the Duck and Doll and the 6-month thing, that is with perfect luck. I don't know the exact chance of getting a diamond mark whenever you do Cup Jelly every month, but that is with perfect luck. So you could go God knows how long without getting a diamond mark. So yeah, let's all do the Hadal is bad at math dance. Woo! All right, let's get back to the video.
Anyway, yes, drills. Your monster will attempt to complete their training task, whether it's dodging a boulder, knocking over pillars, swimming a course, etc. Monsters have hidden motivation values for each drill that determine the chance of a successful outcome. There are 4 possible outcomes: a regular success, a failure, a cheat, which we've already gone over, and a great. Failures are basically a waste of your week, since no stats are gained, but there is the opportunity to punish or forgive your monster if you wish to influence its nature. Successes are pretty self-explanatory, and your monster gets a raise in one of its stats. A great outcome is your monster exceeding expectations, giving them a larger stat gain, plus an opportunity to praise it. How many gained stat points is dependent on several factors, like the monster's age, their loyalty, and the species' natural talents in certain stats. For example, the Zilla gets great gains in life and power, but its intelligence and skill gains are much lower. Where light drills and heavy drills split is in their stats and fatigue cost. Heavy drills boost 2 stats at once, one majorly and the other minorly, and tire out your monster a lot faster. All drills have had a new challenge level system attached to them. Each drill has a star rating from 1 to 3, and when a new level is reached through repetitive use, the drill environment changes to reflect that. What sucks about this system is that these more challenging drills lower the chance of a success, but your monster isn't rewarded with any extra stats. It only punishes you. There is nothing beneficial about this whatsoever. Your monster really should get a better stat reward for completing these higher level drills, because right now, this is just bad. Errand trees are a month-long training course that the player pays to send their monster to. Stat gains here are better than normal, but the real value comes from the opportunity to learn new techniques. The monster is hit with a lot of fatigue by doing this, however, and unfortunately they get so tired by the end that hits to their overall lifespan are inevitable. Plus, if they fail or get defeated by the occasional wild monster, there is a chance they could get injured. How it works is, each week is spent attempting a stage in a 4-stage long course. Successes are dependent on your monster's loyalty. If they succeed on the first 3 stages, they'll make it to the final one. This 4th stage involves a scripted cutscene against a boss, usually a large animal. I'm not sure what to make of the world-building implications of having gigantic crabs, polar bears, gorillas, and a goddamn Tyrannosaurus just roaming about in your world. As I said previously, it's not hard to notice how templated the animations for these scenes are. If the 4th stage is completed, there's a chance for a wild monster fight, but we'll come back to that because I have some choice words for these encounters. Errand trees also sometimes have sales, similar to the item shop, which brings the price for a course down to 1,000 gold from 2,000. It's funny that, like Monster Rancher 1, the clerk has the same character arc of initially treating you rudely, then becoming respectful, and finally friendly with the player after they've risen in their breeder rank. He's definitely more overtly an asshole this time around, with his goofy aristocratic powdered wig. This time there are 4 courses initially available to the player, with the final one unlocked after a monster reaches the B rank. These courses offer the power, intelligence, skill, and speed courses, which in turn offer the heavy, withering, hit, and sharp technique categories respectively. The life stat doesn't get its own course anymore, but every course also rewards some points in that stat anyway. Those of you who've seen my Monster Rancher 1 video will know I wasn't a fan of how technique categories fit into that errand tree system, and I'm pleased to say that these were mostly improved in Monster Rancher 2. Heavy techs, for example, will always be found in the power course, withering techs in the intelligence course, etc. These pairings are generally more useful and consistent with how useful the stats gained in these courses are. Like, if you're trying to get a tech meant for higher accuracy, getting good skill gains alongside that will help even more. The purpose of a heavy tech is to do big damage, so getting power gains would help even more with that. Unfortunately, there are still instances of intelligence-based heavy techs being found in a power course and vice versa, but overall, it's a noticeable improvement from Monster Rancher 1. Not perfect, but it's more consistent across the board, and power monsters aren't being screwed out of the power course until they hit C rank anymore. So we've gone over all the facilities accessible at your ranch, except one, the item shop. Visit here immediately, because new purchasable items are unlocked at regular intervals starting from your first visit. This includes an event item that unlocks the mock species if you can get to B rank within 25 in-game years. This should not be hard to achieve by any means, but it's the only time a monster unlock can be permanently locked. This is due to a bug with the shop's item slots being full after 25 years, causing the mock item event to not activate. This bug has been fixed in the DX editions though, thankfully. But yes, items. There are many staple holdovers from Monster Rancher 1, such as the mint leaf, apple cake, smoked snake, and others. Items from the item shop are pretty useful and can affect most aspects of your monster. You can mitigate fatigue and stress, fatten up or slim down your monster, or change their nature towards good or bad. The stat drugs from Monster Rancher 1 are back as well. I always steered clear of them since the lifespan hits for the stats you gain seemed very risky. However, through the creator Teoch, link in description, I learned that they can be very useful if used at the very early stages of a monster's life. Since your monster stat gains are low at the beginning, the stat boosts from the drug are actually better than just regular training. It's like you have a kid and they can't bench press anything above 5 pounds, so you roid them up so they can start lifting 10 pounds, meanwhile they're aging faster to get to puberty earlier. Ridiculous analogies aside, there are several items in Monster Rancher 2 that aren't really new, just a previous item given a new name. Nuts oil for alleviating fatigue, for example, but more importantly, the plant egg has been renamed to the silver peach, I assume to complement the gold peach, which has remained mostly unchanged. One of the most useful items in Monster Rancher 2 is the magic banana. Originally the unlock item for the ape species in MR1, this time the item ended up as the key to extremely long life in Monster Rancher 2. You see, when a monster consumes a magic banana in 2, one of 3 effects can happen. Each effect changes the fear, spoil, and form statistics in some way, but one of the effects will increase a monster's lifespan by 1 week. And this is an item you can buy, in theory, an infinite supply of. Granted, this exploit requires a lot of tedious resetting to get use out of, but if you have the patience and money, any monster can extend its life tremendously without any peaches. However, the lifespan effects were removed in the DX editions, though the magic banana still remains useful for its other effects. Returning as well are the passive ranch buffing items like the Artemis statue, Firestone, and Gemini pots. I am being deliberately vague here, but they have effects that reduce fatigue or stress by a small percentage, sometimes only being active for certain seasons of the year. Because of that, they're considered to be not very useful, with the exception of the hero/heal badges that affect a monster's nature, and the Gemini pots. Gemini pots reduce stress a bit, but also gives your monster a bit of fear, therefore helping gain loyalty. Plus, you can get them fairly early, and their effects stack. That's why it's recommended to keep a few of them, and some of the hardcore efficiency training methods require a minimum amount of pots. In the DX versions, Gemini pots were buffed, having the minimum effects on stress increased to a flat, individually calculated amount rather than just a percentage, making them even better to stack. At any rate, if you've got any passive items that aren't useful or unnecessary, they usually sell for 1,000 gold or 2. But honestly, it is a shame that so many of the items in this particular niche do so little to affect your monsters. I'm not really sure if these count as true items, but sometimes your monster will request gifts during the week. Most often I notice these requests after a monster beat a tournament or got a great success on a drill. It's like the monster knows they did a good job and wants a reward. I couldn't confirm this, but it seems like monsters with a worse nature will request items more often. As annoying as these can be, I think they're great for adding personality to a monster species. Each species has a gift or two they like. For example, a tiger could ask for an inexpensive bone or a pair of shoes to chew on. Sometimes the gifts are pretty expensive, and personally I almost never give my monster their request if it's above a few hundred gold. All these items do is lower stress by a small amount, maybe fatten your monster a bit, so skipping on them doesn't affect much. On the flip side, sort of, monsters will sometimes give gifts to Colt instead, and it seems like having a better nature increases this chance, but I could be wrong. Sometimes these items are rather sweet, like flowers, other times they're quite literally trash. It's still very endearing to me, and adds another layer of personality to monsters. The items themselves are not very useful, much like the request items. They give a minor stress reduction and are only worth a bit of gold. Just sell them before they fill up your limited inventory spaces. It wouldn't be complete if I didn't also talk about the lifespan extending items. Not the banana, of course, I mean the peaches. Across the series, they are always sought after by players due to the significant lifespan they give to a monster. Gold peaches give 50 weeks, essentially an extra year, and the silver peach gives 25 weeks. It should be obvious what makes this extra time so useful. It's more time to grow your monster's stats and progress within the ranks. What's different this time around is the limitations on obtaining and feeding the peaches. This is one of those things about the series that people get confused about, and often the rules in Monster Rancher 2 are assumed to be in 1. But how it works is, any monster can obtain 1 gold peach and 1 silver peach in their lifetime, and can only consume 1 of each in their lifetime. Gold peaches have an extra limitation. They're found as a treasure when exploring the Pare Pare jungle map, and after finding one, 10 years must pass before another can be found, like they have to regrow or something. This makes choosing a monster to eat it a very meaningful decision, since 10 years in-game could be hours of gameplay, assuming you aren't using fast forward. Silver peaches, on the other hand, are obtained as a reward for winning the Elder's Cup in June. To enter this tournament, your monster has to be older than 300 weeks, aka 6 years and 3 weeks. At first, getting your monster to survive to even 5 years of age would be difficult, but with accumulated resources and knowledge, this age should be achievable on any monster. More or less, that's all the items, and with that, we've covered all the mechanics you'll find on the ranch specifically. Now, let's talk about how these mechanics are used to raise your monsters. Monster Rancher 2, like its predecessor and the games after, centers around routines measured in weeks. Time management is a big part of that, since you want to plan ahead for future events. Some of these events could be tournaments or expeditions, which monsters should be given time to rest for. Sending them off to these events without proper rest will damage their lifespan further, leading to an earlier retirement or even an unexpected death. And this might be ultimately subjective, but it just feels awful to see the monster suffering. Like, yeah, living longer means a better chance at progression through the tournament ranks, or making more money, but aside from these mechanical benefits, I simply just don't enjoy seeing my monster exhausted or hurt. Like in Monster Rancher 1, it's a testament to how well the game's creators knocked it out of the park when giving their monsters personality. The player can really get immersed in the world and see their monster as a living creature, rather than just a 3D model with animations. Back when Yahtzee Croshaw was still with 0 punctuation, he made a point in his review of Detroit Become Human about how the seriousness of the drama in the setting was hard to believe.
As with many David Cage games, it's the kind of plot that makes you constantly yell questions at the screen. Why were androids built for menial tasks designed to look and act perfectly human in the first place? Why weren't they boxes on wheels? Or how about this? A dog with Dr. Octopus tentacles. That would have been more efficient at cleaning up and amusing for the kids. But considering the androids do look human, why are all the real humans so unflinchingly hateful and dismissive of them, when the android's superficial human qualities would be triggering the sympathy instinct in most normal people?
I bring this up because it highlights this weird tendency we have as humans to bond with anything. Amongst other human emotions, it is precisely this bonding response that I believe Monster Rancher 2 taps into. Despite the, human qualities of certain monsters, the relationship the player has with their monster is closest to a pet, or maybe a prized farm animal certain to win the blue ribbon at the county fair. For example, sometimes your monster will want to spend a week playing with you. Depending on the season, they will ask for a snowball fight minigame, a rock paper scissors sumo match, or a sparring contest. This third one never happened for me though. These do have the benefit of lowering fatigue and stress, much like resting, and your monster will get really stressed if you break your promise to play with them. Mechanics aside though, this is a small but really sweet activity to add to the game. Whether you win or lose doesn't matter, it's all about spending time with your monster. Aside from that, if you treat your monster well, in the data window it'll actually say your name under the likes field. You've got to have a heart of stone not to be even just a little heartwarmed by that. In doing research for this video, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole reading about people interacting with their Roomba vacuums. Customers would send in their unit for a repair, but request to keep the original one as if it was part of the family. Or people would project fear onto it during a thunderstorm, placing the vacuum in their lap like it was a small dog. If humans can bond with Roombas, ships, or other objects, naturally it takes a lot less mental trickery to get us to bond with virtual creatures, much less human-like robots. Virtual pets don't even need to animate or make sounds realistically to elicit this response either. Take a look at Neopets or Tamagotchis. The former doesn't even move, only making faces and having its status indicated by colored text. Tamagotchis are simple sprites with simple animation, with simple beeps for sound, and yet many people still form emotional attachments to them. Not every gamer is going to feel this though. You could easily distill Monster Rancher 2 down into a game simply about choosing options on a menu with the occasional exciting battle. The raising aspect may be very dull to some players, or you could see your creatures as just data. There's nothing wrong with that, it's just a different way of responding to the game, and I still hold that not every game will or should appeal to every player. My point is, while for many players, it may be easier for them to be immersed in the game like this, but the opportunities for bonding with your monster in Monster Rancher 2 are to be commended. The effort put into making these creatures seem alive on screen, the detail in their movements, the sounds they make, their reactions to your decisions, both positive and negative, these aspects work together to help form these emotional attachments. It's one of the game's biggest strengths, which is why the whole templating animation thing sticks out so much. But I digress. At the same time, perhaps juxtaposing the emotional side of monster raising, part of time management is also considering the long term with your monster. By that I mean fitting in as much training time as possible between rests, and ultimately as much as possible before they get too old. Efficiency, to put it simply. At its core, it is more about engaging with mechanics to make numbers go up. These time limits on how long you have with a monster create a pressure on the player to be more efficient with their time management. It's my belief that this pressure is what pushes certain players in developing these crazy hyper-efficient routines that make use of a monster's full life. There's certainly satisfaction to be found in accomplishing that. Now, for the new and casual player, this level of hyper-efficiency is not necessary, but being mindful about the mortality of your monster is objectively a helpful mindset. To give some advice, when you generate a new monster, think about what goals you are trying to accomplish with it. Are you trying to ascend the tournament ranks and try for the Major 4? Is this monster meant for expeditions? Are you just trying to make money? Or perhaps this monster is meant for unlocking new monsters, as I did with certain wild boss fights. It also depends on what stats this fresh monster is geared toward. If you have a monster with low intelligence gains, but want a monster to find items on expeditions, it will take significantly more time to level that stat to a level where it'll be useful. Perhaps it would be best to try out a monster more suited to the task. It's choices like these that the player will have to make in their heads if they don't wish to waste time with their monster's lifespan. Lifespan really is important in Monster Rancher 2. Veteran players who have come up with hyper-efficient schedules focus primarily on keeping lifespan damage on their monster to a minimum, or remove it entirely. All monsters have a preset number of weeks to live before they die. This is dependent mostly on a monster's main species, but the subtype can give it a bonus or remove a portion of the base number of weeks. On top of that, in the initial release of Monster Rancher 2, monsters were given an additional 100 weeks of life to counter the effects of certain activities. Errantry and tournaments unfortunately have unavoidable damaging effects to a monster's lifespan. Errantry actually has a bug that deals the hit twice, causing a minimum of 8 weeks to be lost on your monster's lifespan. In the DX version, this bug was fixed, and the lifespan hit remains, but only has a minimum of 2 weeks lost. That additional 100-week compensation was also removed, but frankly, I never noticed a difference. Typically, monster lifespans can range from between around 330 to 500 weeks in the original game. Roughly, that equates to around 7 to 10 years. Jokers and dragons, for example, tend to live short lives, while golems and rakis live a very long time. But Colt says that the average life for a monster is 3 to 4 years. That tells me that it's expected for the player to lose quite a bit of lifespan over the course of raising their monster. Keep in mind that 7 to 10 range is at maximum efficiency, with no lifespan lost or gained. That means no errantries, minimal fatigue, and minimal stress. So ideally the player will benefit from finding a schedule that lowers the amount of lost potential lifespan. This means limiting combat and errantries, because these don't just damage lifespan directly, it's based on their hits to fatigue and stress. You see, how lifespan is damaged by high fatigue and stress is through a hidden value known as the Lifespan Index in the fan-made Advanced Viewer. This third-party program detects your game and allows you to see the hidden stats about your current monster. It'll change how you play for sure. Stress and fatigue values combine, and if they pass a certain threshold, you get a negative lifespan index displayed in the number of weeks lost. If any lifespan is lost during a month, Colt will usually give the player a message warning the player their monster is tired or stressed out. I say usually because there were times I was taking a single week of lifespan loss with no word from Colt. Lifespan hits tend to get worse the more stress and fatigue are allowed to build up, so making sure those values stay low and managed is key in not losing your lifespan. Items such as nuts, oil, and mint leaf are also essential unless you have a very strict budget. Cult does give weekly status updates about your monster's energy, but these updates are not quite accurate to whether you're losing lifespan or not. To save money on items, I would have a monster do 2 weeks of light drills, then rest. This would keep their lifespan index in the positive while not requiring me to use nuts, oil, and mint leaf at all. However, this meant that I would always have to rest my monster when Cult says the monster seems well. Now, I don't know about you, but that tells me the monster still has some energy left before needing to rest. But if I do that, the monster will lose a guaranteed 1 week of lifespan before they're actually tired. The change in the monster's outward behavior, the point where they go from normal walking to their tired walk, happens between seems tired and them being very tired. Granted, I would usually rest them at seems tired, but that would still incur a lifespan loss. It seems like a logical point to rest. The situation is somewhat frustrating because as a player, I'm just responding to information being given to me. My monster is being punished for it, and the game expects that my monster will live around 3 to 4 years, which at the time, they were. Until I started using the advanced viewer to see the lifespan index, I had no idea these frequent lifespan hits were occurring. At most, I was getting puzzling stress messages from Cult. It didn't seem like I was working my monster very hard at all. That's why I said earlier, the advanced viewer can change how you play. I just wish the player was given more accurate updates from Cult about the tiredness of their monster. With my routine of 2 light drills per every rest, my monsters were living until they were 7 or 8 years old consistently, and yes, I know item use would give me more breathing room to train. I only refrained from regularly buying nuts, oil, and mint leaves for the dual purpose of saving money and establishing a baseline for balancing fatigue and stress.
We've got to have money.
I absolutely recommend using the advanced viewer if you're playing on PC. But in the context of analysis, the player really should be given better information on lifespan loss instead of the game just expecting you to lose nearly half of your monster's potential lifespan. But you don't have to do what I did by going full penny pincher. Once I had an abundance of gold, I tried one of the simpler versions of the no rest method. This routine involves alternating your monster between heavy drills and light drills, while alternating feeding them nuts, oil, and mint leaves. Depending on the monster, it also requires a minimum number of Gemini pots. Like the name, there is no resting, but I had to do it a few times to account for sending my monster on errantries. Despite the lifespan lost there, getting new techniques is very valuable. I chose a dragon golem for this, 1, because it looks cool, and 2, because the golem subtyping helps mitigate a dragon's lower lifespan. No gold peach, but only a silver one was fed to it. This method also requires a diet of pure tablets. The outcome was that my dragon got to 100 loyalty and pretty much stayed there for the rest of its life. I had less Gemini pots than required, so I did lose around 3 weeks of lifespan, but across my dragon's nearly 8 years of life, that's barely a loss. My drills often min-maxed the dragon for defense rather than speed, and by the end it had some seriously impressive stats. Absolutely trounced the Major 4 as well. Even as imperfect as my attempt of the no-rest method was, it was still highly effective. To beat the game, this level of efficiency is not necessary, but I'm bringing this up more so to illustrate the potency of taking your monster's lifespan seriously. Overall, it's the mixing of the emotional connection with your monster, combined with the game's nature of rewarding efficient stat management that creates the experience of raising your monster, and Monster Rancher 2 does a damn good job of it. The primary goal of raising your monsters is for the tournaments. Tournaments are Coliseum-style battles between monsters, one-on-one. In the world of Monster Rancher, it is treated as a popular and highly competitive sport. Tournaments are rated on the usual system of E up to S, based on the real-world grading system in Japanese public schooling. A monster ascends the rankings by winning official tournaments held at the end of one of 4 months of the year. Unofficial tournaments are also held many times across the year, but usually these are entered for the gold and item rewards. Upon winning the S-rank official tournament, a monster can then be invited to each of the Major 4 tournaments. Winning these will award the monster a crest, and when all 4 are won, the player achieves the rank of Master Breeder, which counts as the win state of the game. Tournaments have had a lot added to them in Monster Rancher 2. There are 2 formats, the original round-robin format that had you fighting every opponent at least once, and a knockout format with a winners and losers bracket. Official tournaments are always round-robin. Each of these formats have their trade-offs. On one hand, having to fight every monster will test your own build against a variety of opponents. You'll see how your monster fares against both speedy and tanky monsters, ones with high power or high intelligence, and at times, monsters created to fight at certain distances. You can really get a sense of your monster's strengths, and also what you need to improve on. These round-robin formats do take a while to complete though, even if you end up losing. On the other hand, the knockout bracket styles offer less of a challenge, specifically in the fact of having less opponents to fight, but they are also faster to win by that same fact. Since these are often unofficial, meant for receiving rewards from victory, the speed does help the player build their savings faster. It's a useful system. Also, there's a new type of rare free-for-all tournament that can sometimes be entered. There's only a small handful of them, and you fight an assortment from monsters from 2 rank levels. One is meant for monsters at the earliest stages of life, which is why I never saw it. Even without a deeper knowledge of training schedules, I was just very risk-averse, only entering tournaments once my monster had built its stats up. Another has a pool of A and S rank monsters, but until you enter, there's really no way of knowing that. A third one, the Hero or Heal Cups, give a passive item good for influencing monster natures, and which of the two is dependent on your monster's current nature when you enter. Another new addition is the Fimba vs. Ema tournaments. The initial one is held early on in a new save file, with the character of Pabs, Colt's mentor, coming to invite you. The schools of Fimba and Ema sometimes come together for friendly competition, and if the player attends, they'll encounter characters from Monster Rancher 1, namely Holly and Teska. Monsters from every tournament rank in Monster Rancher 1 are also here to represent Fimba. Colt and the player meet with Holly and establish a friendly rivalry. Colt recognizes Holly as a world-famous breeder, so in a small bit of continuity, we know that the Monster Rancher 2 is supposed to take place after 1. Makes sense, being a sequel, but large-scale time barely matters within a single game. Colt and Holly could assist the player for hundreds of in-game years, so it's notable to point out. Monster Rancher 3, for example, takes place far in the past. And for players of MR1, a cameo by beloved characters from MR1 is a harmless bit of fan service. They don't overshadow the cast of the new game. Whether or not the player wins, Pabs will come to the ranch later with an announcement. Fimba has shared some of their monster secrets with Ema, unlocking the Worm, Mew, Galley, and Henger. It's like each part of the world has their own unique monsters. I really like this sequence of events because it adds to world building, in a game where world building isn't necessary. Like with the Creation Myth intro, it shows the level of passion with creating a world. The combat itself remains very much the same in terms of base mechanics, but there have been some changes and additions. Like the first game, combat is largely based on risk management with your monster's guts. Guts is a resource built up in battle at a fixed rate based on your monster's species and subtype. The guts regen rate is often expressed in terms of the frames required to generate a single point of guts. Fewer frames per guts is faster, meaning better, and more frames makes the regen rate slower. Your monster's guts is also tied to your success in both attacking and defending. The higher your guts in relation to your opponent's number will give you more damage and accuracy. This creates a sort of tug-of-war relationship between you and your opponent. Since attacking at all will consume guts, if you simply spam them, you open yourself up to retaliation from your opponent, and they will likely have better odds against you. However, this goes both ways too, and creating a situation where you have high guts and your opponent has theirs lower will be advantageous. I should note, however, that there is a bug in the original version of the game, where enemies will only attack at a guts value of 45 or more, which can make them quite easy to exploit when hit by multiple withering attacks. This has been fixed in the DX versions. But I don't want to give a simplistic explanation of the combat, since many more factors will affect damage, accuracy, and defenses. Obviously, having high values in particular stats will contribute to your damage taken or received, chances to hit, etc. Positioning is also integral to the combat. Attacks all have slots in specific ranges, and there are 4 ranges you can attack from. Depending on the situation, opponents might not have moves in a particular slot, making it safe to stay in. Both you and the opponent can move left and right, and despite the fact you are in a 3D arena, all controlled movements are entirely two-dimensional. When too close to each other, a monster can push the other away, allowing each combatant to further manipulate the distance between them. Besides distance, time can also be manipulated to an extent. In tournaments, matches are 60 seconds, and wild monster battles max at 3 minutes despite lacking a visible timer. I complained before that the animations in Monster Rancher 2 have a sluggish quality to them. While I mentioned their aesthetic quality, I did not mention their legitimate tactical use. You see, because some of these animations are slower, they waste time on the clock. This can give your opponent less time to retaliate against you. Certain attacks will also do a comical flattening animation on the enemy, which eats up an extra second or two as they cartoonishly pop back into shape. If your strategy is to run out the clock, this can be great. But some of you might be wondering, why would you run out the clock instead of just KOing your opponent? Well, when the time runs out, the monster with the highest percent of their HP bar is left considered the winner. You could be at a max HP of 50 and the opponent at 999, but if the enemy takes a single hit, they're considered a lower percent than you when the timer hits 0.
Am I a stinker?
This strategy seems especially suited for the Hopper monster, who tends not to deal high damage, but has great speed to dodge with. However, when two monsters are at full health when the timer runs out, the monster with the highest life stat is the de facto winner. As I said before, life can also act as an effective defensive stat to absorb damage with. So while that previous situation might make it seem useless, it's really not. Sharp techniques also have a higher critical chance, but these are often considered less useful than more consistent forms of damage. On the flip side, there's also a new addition to the battle system that has the potential to end fights very quickly. Okay, technically battle specials sort of existed in MR1, but the Fury status was the only example. In MR2, there are a variety of special battle statuses that often give an edge to the monster under its effect. A classic example is the Grit status, where a monster will survive a KO hit with 1 HP. Another effect like Power will increase the damage your monster deals by an extra 100%. And then you have an effect like Guard, which reduces the damage a monster takes and deals while increasing their guts regeneration rate. All battle specials end after a short amount of time, usually between 6 to 12 seconds. There's many more specials with other effects too. In general, battle specials trigger due to situations like being hit multiple times, dealing high damage, getting low on health, etc. Certain monster natures also have their own exclusive battle specials. Overall, these effects can be quite powerful, turning the tide of a match or solidifying a victory. You can even breed for them too, with some disc chips allowing you to pass down a special to your baby monster. Overall, in my experience, these battle specials didn't activate too often, but often had quite the influence over the match. But that's with the caveat that I wasn't seeking battle specials out or actively trying to exploit them. Switching gears, I want to talk about monster AI in battle. This applies to enemies mostly, but there are times when your monster will fight on its own. In tournaments, you can choose to let your monster fight with its AI, but frankly, I never do this. Spoiler alert, monster AI is pretty terrible. Veteran players have dissected how the AI works, and while it's not random per se, in battle it definitely feels that way. In a vacuum, ignoring their stat spread, the biggest danger you face from any monster is the AI's ability to launch an attack on the very first frame of the battle. That tends to only happen at the highest ranks though. But if you've played the game for long enough, I know you've experienced this. One way you can abuse the AI is by keeping yourself close to an enemy who doesn't have any close range attacks. Sure, the enemy might decide to push you away, but they rarely capitalize on it. You can easily just close the distance again and start the bullying cycle. Even if they do have close range attacks, the constant jostling can help with that tactical time wasting I mentioned earlier. When you get two AI monsters fighting each other, then it just gets ridiculous. In wild monster battles during errantry, these AI versus AI fights are unavoidable, and unfortunately necessary to unlock some species. Your monster will often waste its guts on moves it's not built to use, such as power moves when it's an intelligence build, or another equally inefficient attack. Sometimes your monster will just move back and forth, letting the clock run out when it could be attacking. All of the strategy you have at your disposal when you have control, the specialization of stats and your unlocked techniques, goes out the window. It's extra awful because in wild monster battles, there's an invisible 3-minute timer combined with a unique rule on HP. All timeouts result in a loss for your monster, regardless of the opponent's remaining health. So only by KOing your opponent can you win. So you have a limited time frame, extra strictness on your win condition, while having your monster effectively lobotomized for the duration. This is legitimately frustrating. You would think a wild battle would have no rules at all, but no, after 3 minutes you just give up, I guess. Two of the monster species to unlock, the Zilla and the Jill, are unlocked in this way, as well as several unique breeds of existing monsters. The Centaur is also unlocked via a wild battle, but you can lose that one and still get the combination item, so I don't count it here. With the Zilla and the Jill, you have to fight a special wild creature of those species and win with a KO. The Zilla King is a tank, sporting high power, HP, and defense. He is certainly capable of one-shotting many monsters. I built a galley specifically to defeat him, building primarily into intelligence and speed to counter him. Despite this, during the many attempts to bring him down, you can see my galley still attacking with its pitiful power attacks. The Jill Big Hand, I would argue, is even more dangerous, having higher intelligence despite less defense and life than Zilla King. He has more versatile damage to swing at you with. But I still ran into the same AI issues. I promise you, if I had manual control of my monster, these fights would be a lot less annoying. Now sure, I could have built a different stat build to help deal with him in a different way, but stats aren't my problem here. My point is that it's the loss of control of your monster that is the frustrating part, even with monsters raised specifically to counter these boss creatures. On the topic of frustrations, there's one other thing I'd like to mention. It's not something inherently wrong with the game, just the nature of the beast, so to speak. RNG. By that I mean this. Monster Rancher as a series is heavily based in random number generation. Most activities you do involve some sort of computerized roll of the dice. As players, we want a desirable outcome with these dice rolls, and through building our monster's stats and techniques, we seek to minimize randomness and reduce risk. We don't want to miss attacks, we don't want to be hit by enemy attacks, and we want to benefit from random critical hits. In Monster Rancher 2, this is quite achievable, but no matter how much the odds are in your favor, or even against you, certain outcomes can surprise you. 19% chance to hit on frame 1? Nope. We've entered what I like to call
A bunch of baloney! Baloney!
enemy is confused. I have a 90% chance to hit. I wish. Another moment of
Baloney!
hitting my opponent, carving through his high defense but a 30% chance to hit.
Baloney!
Guess I'll die. This happened twice in a row against this enemy.
Baloney!
It's not always me getting screwed over either. 81% chance to hit me while I'm confused? Nope.
Baloney! Baloney! Baloney!
This often doesn't happen, but when it does, you feel it. Frankly, I don't trust anything lower than 70% to consistently hit, or anything below 30% to miss reliably. I've never played XCOM, but to all the XCOM players watching, I think I understand. It isn't that egregious, I'm honestly just being a little dramatic, especially with those clips featuring a dice roll around 30%. And for every clip of some bullshit happening, there are a ton of moments where the RNG works as expected. I just think it's funny. Overall, despite my complaints, the combat is pretty great, don't get me wrong. For starters, the tournaments serve as a solid test of how you raise your monster. In tournaments, particularly official ones, you'll find a variety of other builds that give you different challenges to overcome, as I said before. You'll encounter enemies that focus on different stats, like being tanky with high defense or having high speed. Others may have high damage and low accuracy, some may be well-rounded altogether. Each monster species having different techniques with different stats like high accuracy, high damage, withering, etc. helps when meeting these varied opponents in battle. Say you're fighting a monster with high speed, but low defense and HP. Choosing a hit tech to attack with for the battle is a great way to hit the slippery little bastard. On the flip side, encountering a brick wall of an enemy who can't dodge means throwing out the heavy techs, or even a sharp tech if you got nothing else, where their high damage helps to pierce the enemy's defense. I don't mean this to sound reductive, because the player still has to work for these attacks by investing lifespan and money into obtaining them. Plus, there's still the constant management of distance between you and your enemy. Using the stat and technique systems, you've got a really robust combat system here. A lot of this is rooted in its prequel, but Monster Rancher 2's combat expands on Monster Rancher 1. You've got more monsters to fight and fight with, sure, but you've got extra mechanics like the greatly expanded battle specials and the technique upgrades. These reward the player with greater combat potential through their work to obtain them. You've also got new types of tournaments to add variety to the game's yearly schedule. One of the best changes is that you can skip ahead in the official tournaments by 1 rank. That's right, as long as you have the ability to beat ranks above you, you are only required to beat 3 of the official tournaments in order to challenge the Major 4. Talk about a way to save lifespan. And finally, on a smaller note, you've got some defensive qualities added to power and intelligence for some extra utility. Ultimately, the combat system is essentially the same as Monster Rancher 1, just expanded upon in almost every way. Yeah, the AI versus AI battles suck, especially if they're forced upon you when unlocking a new species. But they far from overshadow the positive additions made to an already solid battle system. And similar to the previous game, once you rise in the ranks enough, the player can earn the opportunity to unlock expeditions. This time around, the player is required to beat different ranks, so a little more work to achieve. To unlock the 3 expedition locations, you'll first have to complete a small quest. Each expedition has its own NPC who visits your ranch, and to get them to show up, your monster needs to have a certain amount of its life stat, fame, and beaten either C or B rank depending. This first quest has Dr. Talico showing up, and only requires 140 life, at least 40 fame, and having beaten the D rank. He's an archaeologist from a place called Torval University, and is seeking a mythical shrine he believes to be at Karia Volcano. If you choose to go, Talico will explain the mechanics of the expedition gameplay, and you'll be sent on your way. Like Monster Rancher 1, you move on a tile grid system. Moving one space will consume one energy point, your pool of which corresponds to your life stat. Attempting to remove obstacles with your power stat and searching points of interest with your intelligence stat will also consume this resource. Not really a fan of the fact that they respawn, to be honest. Since attempting to remove them is based on your power as well as the roll of the dice, you could easily waste a lot of energy trying to remove a large boulder or something you've gotten rid of several times before. Who's replacing these giant stones? Run out of energy before you return to the entrance, and you'll take a nasty lifespan hit. The path up Karia is a simple linear spiral, this being a tutorial and all. At the top is a single cave, and upon searching, a short cutscene will play, revealing the Phoenix monster. You can actually obtain the fire feather needed to unlock it in this tutorial if you have the stats for it, which is pretty neat. If not, the next time you turn to Karia, it'll be there, but the area will be greatly expanded, and the requirements to enter are higher. The two other locations are the Pare Pare Jungle and Toral's Mountains. Like the return to Karia, the maps are pretty elaborate, especially compared to MR1. There's a lot more obstacles plus new teleport tiles for getting around. What's great is now you can choose any direction rather than being locked to a single path until hitting a crossroads like in the previous game. One of the most notable changes is how searching for items works. In Monster Rancher 2, when investigating a location, there's a maze-like UI window representing your monster as they search the spot. You watch in real time as your monster reaches an endpoint, and if your intelligence stat is high enough, there's a good chance it'll be a path with an item at the end. Now, this change is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, it's impossible to have a monster get lost like in Monster Rancher 1. That was a huge pain and a waste of the player's time. You couldn't do anything to keep it from happening either, regardless of your monster's intelligence stat. It's great we don't have to worry about that now. However, in Monster Rancher 2, there's some new annoyances to deal with. For starters, each location has a limit on how many items you can find inside. When I was hunting for specific items, like items for unlocking new monsters, this got really frustrating at times. When first exploring an item spot, you aren't sure if what you want has actually spawned in the limited items available there. There's a chance it just isn't there, and you won't know until you've expended all of the item slots. Even with high intelligence, monsters can also repeatedly travel the same paths they've gone before, so I'm forced to sit there watching them do it, sometimes over and over. The more items you pick up, the more likely this is, since the number of new useless dead ends increases. Unlock items for species like the Joker Mask, Fire Feather, etc. only spawn on one location, so you'll have to reset if they don't end up spawning. At least with other valuables, there's a chance of trying another explorable location. Essentially, we've traded one annoyance for another between games. Expeditions are still the objectively most lucrative method of getting money, but personally, I prefer to just battle tournaments. I tolerated watching my monster go down the wrong paths repeatedly for the sake of unlocking all the monsters, but hunting and resetting for valuables to sell? I'll pass. This is where the subjective nature of fun kicks in. When exploring with Dr. Talico, you can find an item to complete his questline. The God Slate is apparently the item he was hunting for, but in-game it does nothing. This is largely considered to be a bit of cut content, and many speculate it was meant to be a method of generating the monster Mu. Mu is a special unique dragon subspecies, and is more famously known as the antagonist of the Monster Rancher anime. But, like I said, speculation. Some of the other treasures you can find include disc chips, passive buff items for your ranch, items also found at the shop, and sometimes the useless junk items like Half-Eaten and Irritator. What's pretty great is at the end of an expedition, there's levels of success or failure you can achieve. If you find unique rare items and open hidden routes, you'll actually be rewarded with 1,000 or 2,000 gold. This makes the unavoidable lifespan loss when adventuring not so bad. But yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about expeditions. Like with the previous game, there's problems, and I think certain tedious aspects like watching the Monster Explorer route could be improved. Maybe a skip function or something, at least you can fast forward in the DX edition. Speaking of DX changes, the unavoidable lifespan loss I just mentioned can be significantly reduced from the minimum of 8 weeks lost down to just 2. Very handy. But yes, overall, expeditions are still very necessary and useful for unlocking monsters and getting money, respectively. And yeah, I can tolerate the tedium if working toward a specific goal, but there's still a few frustrations to deal with regardless. This next section is in a bit of a weird spot, admittedly. Usually I include points on the music and sound aspects of the game alongside the visuals in what I call the game's presentation. This time, I split the visuals off at the beginning. If you had played the games in sequence, as I have, I'm sure the difference in visuals are going to be immediately noticeable. However, the way MR2 handles its sound and music leads more to a point I want to make about the game's overall tone or atmosphere. I'm going to talk about sound design first, because I don't have much to say. When I talk about sound design, I'm more specifically referring to sound effects used in monster sounds, attacks, environmental sounds, and sounds from the UI. For the vast majority of the game, the sound design is honestly pretty great. The most important examples, I feel, are the monster sounds, since combined with their animations, they do a lot of work in bringing these strange creatures to life. Like the prequel, monsters will make sounds for all kinds of actions and reactions, like eating, happiness, being upset, and it seems like they can also react to the training you're hovering over. These give monsters a lot of personality, just like their animations. There's a lot of new monsters, so I'm still impressed that the developers put so much effort into the variety of monster sounds, even if sometimes they sound like Tim Allen grunts.
384, 110? It's just Tim Allen.
The UI still has that classic set of glass-like sound effects that play when you interact with the menus, but it sounds a bit fainter and quieter, as if they had to re-record it. I don't know, but in the DX versions, it's back to normal. The DX edition also contains a remastered soundtrack as well. Battle sounds also are still great. Due to compression or just distortion, I don't know, but they still have that bit of scratchy texture to their audio that satisfies my monkey lizard brain. I honestly have very little to say about them. In general, they give me a great sense of impact. Now, the music of the game is a bit different from the previous game. It uses a lot of the same instruments, by which I mean orchestral horns, harps, strings, drums, etc. In tracks like the town theme and Major 4 battle themes, I do hear what sounds like a marimba, and there's something else about the music as a whole. I'm not very knowledgeable about music terms or their structure, but as a listener, it sounds more whimsical. Goofy, even. It extends to even the battle themes. The only way I can describe it is that there's a distinct lack of tension. It even extends to the death sequence when your monster dies. Combined with the sometimes awkward monster animations, this gives the entire game an atmosphere of, well, silliness. Let's take another look at that opening attract mode sequence. If this isn't cartoony and goofy, I don't know what is. Now, I'm not arguing that this is a bad creative choice, just that it is different. Whether or not you enjoyed it is up to the player. Monster Rancher 1 did have levity and whimsy to its atmosphere, but it was a lot more subdued, which fit the historical feeling of the game. Monster Rancher 2 just has a noticeable increase in that levity. It's not just the visuals, the sound, or the music either. Monster Rancher 2 has a notoriously bad translation. Poor grammar and misspellings are pretty common, and this has persisted into the DX version. This isn't even up for debate. If you've played the game, you know. But while the bad translation can reduce how seriously a player should respond to dialogue, the narrative events of the game are already quite silly. What I mean by these events are the cutscenes that activate during certain milestones of the player's progression. This can be steps towards unlocking a new monster with an item, events related to your rank, ranch upgrades, expedition dialogue, or others. Now that I think about it, a lot of the comedic scenes involve paths. The scene where the Joker mask attaches itself to him comes to mind, as well as the interactions with the Metalner aliens that visit with their UFO. In each of the air entry stages, at the end there are those battles against giant animals and dinosaurs. Smacking a giant gorilla on the ass and sneaking away, battling the giant enemy crab with coconuts, making giant polar bears hit each other, are these not goofy as all hell? There's just so much about the game that's just, well, silly. The atmosphere of the game is comedic through and through. Again, it's far from a bad thing, just noticeably different when viewed in the context of being a sequel. Time to get back on track though. As the player uses the tools available to them, they'll reach milestones in rank, unlock various things, and reach the end of their monster's life. By the later parts of the game, they'll likely have gone through several monsters, honestly. Now, I've already talked a lot about specific monster species and their unlocking methods in the context of other topics, but I want to address the subject more directly. Plus, there's a few other methods that don't fit into what's expected. For example, unlocking the Beaklin. This involves first unlocking the worm monster via the Fimba vs. Ema tournament. Then you have to make use of a worm-specific mechanic known as cocooning. Cocooning involves feeding a worm more than 30 cup jelly foods, if you want a Beaklin, and less if you want a different monster. Raise it to between 4 to 5 years of age, keep its stress low, its loyalty high, and your worm will pupate. If you don't get a Beaklin, you'll get one of several other monster species with a worm subtype instead. This can be quite beneficial for monsters like Monol. Poor Monol. It's widely regarded as the worst monster species in the game. It has pretty bad guts regeneration, its stats can be lacking, and its tech pool isn't anything amazing. They generally have good defense, but not much else. I've even seen veterans claim that Monol subs on other monsters are actually a detriment. With cocooning, this changes completely. A cocoon monster keeps the guts regeneration and battle movement speed of the worm, as well as getting a small 30-point boost to one stat. It can be pretty useful. While cocooning is limited to only the worm species, it gives them a pretty unique identity. It's obviously inspired by how real-world beetles grow and pupate, so I think it's pretty appropriate to attach this mechanic to the worm, who didn't have this ability back in MR1. Two other unlocks, the Undyne and the Niton, are also unlocked through a specific monster. If you raise a hopper, you'll notice them burrowing into the ground during their idling. At a certain time of year, at a certain rank, at a low stress level, localized entirely within your ranch, your hopper will enter a cutscene, digging up a hot spring on your ranch.
That's it?
Yes.
This unlocks the Niton species and gives you the item to unlock the Undyne. I think this is pretty cool. It rewards you for using one of the new monster species, and it's appropriate for how the hopper behaves. What's also cool is that the hot springs actually persist permanently on your ranch. You can't enter them, but they do serve as a decoration. The tree you grow to unlock the Mach species is another persistent prop in this way too. Speaking of Mach, you unlock it and the Raki through having a monster die. The idea here is that the soul of your previous monster inhabits an object, such as a dead tree or a creepy-ass ventriloquist dummy. This is in flavor only, these base monsters don't carry over any previous attributes. You also obtain the ghost in this way by upgrading a dead monster's shrine. Now, I question this in Monster Rancher 1 on the basis that the player being rewarded for their monster dying is a bit backwards. There's even more unlocks requiring death in Monster Rancher 2, so surely it's a worse problem, right? Well, I don't think so. In Monster Rancher 2, the 3 unlocks requiring death all require effort on the player to prepare. The Mach requires reaching B rank and playing for enough time. The Raki requires reaching a very high breeder rank while having a monster with fame nearly at maximum. The Ghost requires a total of 13,000 gold invested for the grave of a dead monster, which fits in with the player's role of caring for their monsters. Compared to how Ghost was unlocked in MR1, in MR2 these tasks fit more closely with the player's usual goals of rising in the ranks and earning currency. There's no random chance of a curse mark, or intentionally lowering one's fame like with the Doodle. Actually, I'd like to talk some more in general about death in Monster Rancher as a series. Even before the first video, I had some thoughts, but I didn't bring it up out of considering it too subjective. But I asked around in the Monster Rancher Discord and got a few interesting responses that made me reconsider adding this section. So first off, I'm not consider if I would consider Monster Rancher a series solely intended for children. Obviously the anime is, giving the shonen protagonist and isekai premise, and I can't deny that I get that intended for kids feeling more from later games. But overall, the E for everyone rating all the games have really seems appropriate at a face value, literal definition of the phrase. It is a series to be enjoyed by all ages, at least that's the feeling I get from Monster Rancher 1 and 2 specifically compared to later games. Monster Rancher 2 being closer on the spectrum towards that for kids tone, however, but I chalk that up to the game's more whimsical atmosphere. I mean, the death sequence in both games is your monster just suddenly dying, being discovered after the fact by your assistant. What I'm getting at is this. The way death is presented in MR1 and 2 is honestly surprising. The characters respond to monsters dying very seriously. Dealing with the death involves mourning, funerals, and graves. Every character shown in these funeral sequences responds in this way, not to mention how the player may feel. It's likely many players will simply be annoyed or shocked at the death, opting to load a previous save to retrieve their time spent raising their monster. That's not really engaging with the game on an emotional level though, that's operating the mechanics. But I ask any viewer who played this series as a kid, or even an adult, was there not ever a time where your monster dying made you really sad, perhaps even to tears? Certainly happened to me a couple times. As I grew up, my family had several cats over the years, all of which disappeared or died eventually due to one cause or another. They were cats that lived both inside and outside, so you can imagine the dangers they might have encountered. But even as a kid, I handled losing them strangely well. I was aware that eventually any cat we had would eventually pass away for one reason or another. I wasn't a kid who never cried, far from it, but I genuinely can't recall ever being brought to tears over losing a pet. Sad, yes, but there are many adults who can't help but weep at what is essentially a genuine tragedy. Make no mistake, there is no shame in tears over a pet. Looking back later, I realized that it was playing Monster Rancher 1 that first exposed me to the inevitability of death when it came to pets. The relationship with your monster is very similar to a pet after all. And honestly, for a game with children at least included with the intended audience, it's surprising to see death presented in such a serious way. Like yeah, in Monster Rancher 2 it's a little silly, your monster's ghost comes floating awkwardly out of their body and into the sky, but it's the concept itself that matters. Usually media made with kids in mind will often soften the topic or ignore it outright, and I truly do believe it was Monster Rancher that planted that understanding in me, even if I didn't realize it at the time. That understanding being the fact that any pets I ever adopted would die eventually. That the joy of adding them into your life when you meet is balanced by the price of the grief that comes when they are subtracted from your life. Keeper of the Ledger, Cult of Nature, your body is just another number, etc., etc. I don't mean to be morbid, I think it's just important to remember when you bear the responsibility of a new pet. With that in mind, I try to appreciate the time I have with them now, which I know is a very personal and subjective conclusion to get from a game where I can make a big monkey slap my enemies to unconsciousness. I mentioned before asking around in the community Discord, and I was pleasantly surprised to find a few others who had similar experiences. It was relatively brief, but these other users shared that being exposed to death in a pretty respectful but unbridled way had also helped them mentally prepare for, or at least deal with, the deaths of their pets. This is just anecdotal, of course, but I hope you can at least understand that for some, the Monster Rancher games did have some real wisdom in them. Despite it being so personal, there is value in that. I can't say others would feel the same, so don't mistake me arguing this is the case in any objective way. It's just a very personal experience I had with the series growing up, and I guess it was validating in a way to see others have a similar experience. I kind of regret not sharing it in the MR1 video since it was more relevant there, so I'm doing it now. I guess I just find it admirable that Monster Rancher is willing to represent death without pulling punches or being edgy about it. It can be a delicate line to walk when we're talking about a design product meant to appeal to people. Off the top of my head, the only other game of the time with a similar target audience that deals with the subject of mortality would be Final Fantasy IX. Even then, Vivi's story and that game's overarching themes deal with mortality of people, not pets. Pet lives are obviously not often valued at the level of people, but it is still painful to lose the relationship we have with our cats, dogs, birds, rabbits, pigs, horses, giant isopods, or other animals. Hell, even just a little. Maybe even our virtual monsters. The cycle of our monsters is a microcosm of our relationship with pets, and maybe even other loved ones. Anyway, thanks for indulging me on a very personal, subjective, and perhaps foolish tangent. All of these silly feelings out of the way, let's keep talking about video games. There's a side story within Monster Rancher 2 that is part of several other monster unlocks. The character Binto is a construction foreman or manager who will stop by your ranch at specific times of year if you have reached a particular breeder rank and if you meet certain requirements of gold saved. He offers to upgrade your house and monster stable, with a total of 4 upgrades for the former and 2 expensive upgrades for the latter. It's this first stable upgrade we're interested in him, since in-universe, the reason is that the player's current stable can't house large monsters. This increase in space immediately unlocks the Baku and Golem monsters, and is a base requirement to unlock the Zilla and Dragon, amongst their other quests. Livable space is a pretty logical reason for improving your stable, so I think it adds some good immersion to what's required of the player. If you continue to upgrade your house, you'll get increased inventory slots, but having a fully upgraded stable doesn't actually have any effects on your monsters. The only reward for fully upgrading the stable is a final monster unlock. Binto has a reputation for being incredibly fast when it comes to completing his work, which is a clever way of contextualizing how the player is never interrupted from using the ranch during upgrades. Throughout the game, Colt becomes increasingly interested in finding out how Binto works so fast, and in the questline's final event, you find out his secret. Turns out Binto employs a bunch of Bajarl monsters to help with the construction work. I'm not sure what makes them so valuable, but I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that they're absolutely jacked. To bribe you to keep quiet about such an important company secret, you're gifted with the item to unlock the Bajarl yourself. Unlocking the Metal Nerve can also involve a multi-stage quest. During certain times of year, you may be visited by aliens 1 or more times if you fulfill other rank conditions. For me, the random weather made me have a few events of the alien visitations, and it builds up quite a mystery. There's definitely questions to ask about the existence of alien monsters in a world canonically created by God. These aliens are revealed to be of the Metalner species, who talk down to your whole species, as obviously we are not IQ maxed enough to understand Rick and Morty. Nonetheless, the player is gifted a mysterious crystal which can be used to unlock the Metalner. Since the vast majority of monster unlocks in Monster Rancher 1 are achieved through tournaments and expeditions, I'm pleased that the sequel made a serious effort to include more of these story events with the unlocks. There are other events tied into unlock quests that do involve tournaments and treasure, but across the board there is simply more story. The examples I chose are just the most story-focused as quests. And even if it can be poorly translated, they do a great job of adding lore to the world and giving side characters some time in the spotlight. There's simply just more monster unlocks this time around, so I appreciate the flavor added to many of them. My only gripe is that some battles for unlock items like the Zilla King, Centaur, and Jill, as well as those unique wild monster subtypes, involve AI versus AI battles, which as I explained previously, can be absurdly frustrating and just plain bad. These are few though, and the majority of monster unlocks show a lot of thought behind them. Moving on, the act of combining is still as much a staple of the game as it was in Monster Rancher 1. It's technically possible to beat the game without ever combining, but that definitely requires foreknowledge of the game's mechanics. Your average player will have to engage with the system, both for unlocking new monsters as well as simply breeding stronger monsters to progress with. At the basic level, combining 2 monsters together will form a baby monster with stronger starting stats based on its parent's stats. The higher the stat, the more of a percentage is inherited, making for a nice initial boost on the baby. Techniques and the number of times a technique has been used will also carry down. Usually the baby will be the main species of one parent and the subtype of the other, but this isn't always the case. However, this is where the simple explanation ends. You can get by just as well not going any deeper, but we're going down the rabbit hole now. If you'll remember, each monster species has an inclination towards certain stat growths. This means a monster of a particular species will gain better numbers in certain stats over others when training. These gains are expressed mechanically as a value between 1 to 5. For example, a base golem gets a stat gain of 5 in power, but a stat gain of 1 in speed and skill. Say you did 1 week of a basic light drill in each stat, the golem would receive more points in power than the other 2 despite equal time spent on each stat. Every monster has some stats that have more potential than others, even on more well-rounded monsters like Zoom and Mochi. Keeping this information in mind is very helpful for raising a monster, but we need to understand this for combining. Now, if you try to combine two monsters, the NPC Daj will comment on the compatibility of the prospective fusion. He determines this through a series of calculations. Those stat gain levels are given a multiplier value in increments of 0.5, starting at times 0 and ending at times 2. You can probably guess, but a stat gain value of 1 gets the 0, and a stat gain value of 5 gets the times 2. Once these multipliers are applied, you'll get a range of numbers for each stat that become highly polarized, to say the least. Getting that times 0 will always make the resulting number, well, 0, so be careful of that. The game then reorders these new stat numbers from highest to least and gives them a corresponding designation number. The highest number gets a 1, the lowest gets a 6, hopefully you get the idea. This creates what is called the stat order. When you combine two monsters, it will compare their two stat orders, and if they have matching stats in their respective orders, those specific stats for the baby will be significantly better. Stats that don't match only receive a small boost. For each stat in the order that matches, Daj's rating of the compatibility will get more favorable. You might be asking, well, why not just breed two identical monsters, since it would be easier to match their stat orders? I suspect this exploit was foreseen during development, since combining two identical monsters will automatically make the worst compatibility rating. But it doesn't stop there. Baby monsters also get a stat order based on their expected initial stats. If the baby stat orders matches the stat orders of both parents, the inherited gains will be even greater. When all three of these monsters have their stat orders matching, this is referred to as true compatibility. It's incredibly valuable. As for techniques, they are inherited based on a 2/3 rule. The game will select 2/3 of a monster's pool of learned techniques, except for its basic starting techs. The first monster you select for the combination is like the main parent, so if the baby ends up being of the same species, the selected techniques and their number of uses will pass down. If not, you'll get one technique of each non-special category, hit, heavy, etc., if the parent has one. With special techniques, however, in general, their number of uses are not passed down. In true Monster Rancher fashion, there's also hidden mechanics that are never explained or mentioned. Each monster species has a hidden ranking on a scale referred to as blood strength by user Alkius, who, if you didn't know, is responsible for the handy guide I've been referencing. Seriously, the Legend Cup fan site is a godsend. Blood strength could very much be compared to real-world dominant or recessive genes. Basically, it's a percentage chance of how likely a certain breed will show up in a baby monster, whether the main species or the subtype. The different competing blood strengths are what determine how your monster looks. Certain species like pixies, golems, zooms, and dragons have a high-tier blood strength and are therefore more likely to affect the look of the baby monster. Meanwhile, monsters like the Ducken, Phoenix, Metalner, and Mach are at the bottom tier of the blood strength scale. That doesn't mean, however, that they're less valuable. In fact, it's the opposite. If you manage to get a baby monster with a lower tier blood to appear, it will actually give the baby's base stats another boost. When doing this, you should be aiming to get as low a percent as possible, making your desired outcome intentionally rare. This can be manipulated even lower with disc chips to maximize the stats you get. Alkius illustrates how nutty this can get by getting a Metalner's blood down to 3%, giving his incredibly rare baby monster stats close to 700 per stat at base. That's only 200 points or so away from maximum. But some of these low percentages are bugged and instead give you basic stats. In the original game, this only affects combinations of 1%, but in DX the bug grew to affect the 2 and 3% values. Why? I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't affect them at all. But to know for sure, you'd have to use the fan-made combination calculator. So like I said, you can easily get by ignoring these deeper mechanics, but if you take the time to pursue them, there's some hugely rewarding outcomes from it. In a way, it's less complicated than Monster Rancher 1. There was a lot I intentionally left out in the first video to save you and myself some sanity, like the fact that your monster's outcome was dependent on some hyper-specific factors like the month and the week. It seems like in Monster Rancher 2, there's less overall variables that go into the systems behind combining, but aspects like the stat order system can make manipulating them somewhat more complex to plan. In my opinion, it's easier to understand, but you have to rely on RNG more. Making use of the hidden mechanics like this does push the game to its limits, but again, as an average player, you don't need to go that deep. I criticized the first game for hiding the deeper levels of its combining mechanics, among others, but I honestly don't know how Monster Rancher 2 could begin to explain Daj's compatibility ratings in depth. It's like a whole package. so I can't really blame the game for leaving the specifics like stat orders and blood strength out. Still, it's a defining aspect of the series, and aside from a few very minor bugs, it functions perfectly fine, rewarding the player for at least making use of it. Eventually your lab storage would run out of space for monsters, so aside from wastefully selling or killing your monsters, it's the only way of removing them. So we've discussed Monster Rancher 2 as a whole, so as we wind down, I'll do what I did before and go through the changes the DX edition makes. At least ones I haven't covered before. There's a lot this time, so I'll go through what I've arbitrarily decided are the most impactful ones and commentate on their quality. Check out Legend Cup for a full list. In the original game, Colt would notify the player when their monster would enter the important prime stage of their life, where stat gains are the highest. However, she would only do this once. In DX, she properly notifies the player every time. This honestly should have always been the case. Drills can't be skipped anymore. There's a fast forward feature in DX, but still, why was this removed? The amount of storage slots in the freezer has been doubled to 20. A great change. The DX edition increases the resolution of textures, which definitely looks better than the original game. However, compared to other free methods using a geometry correction plugin, it's a bit inferior graphically. The DX edition allows for special enemy monsters, bosses, and Japan-only unique breeds to be legitimately obtainable. More monsters and variety is nice. Very good. DX also has online PvP, the original obviously does not. While I don't have much interest in the PvP, I can't imagine this as anything but a good addition. The translation is still bad. This honestly should have been fixed. Yeah, it's funny and endearing to some, but I'm honestly shocked a new translation wasn't made. But yeah, that's what I consider the most important changes not previously mentioned. Now, I'd like to take a bit of time to shine a spotlight on the Monster Rancher community. I've used a lot of community resources to make this video, and it's due to the passionate dissecting of the Monster Rancher series that I could even find much of this information. First off, the Legend Cup site ran by Taylor, otherwise known as Monster Fenric, with contributions by many people including Alkius, Stardust Wyvern, Moosebones, Teach, Lexi, among many others. There's an insane amount of useful guides and tools. The Make a Monster tool in particular can generate dummy files for any monster you want and has a randomizer button to retain that mystery from scanning disks. I made a lot of use out of the Monster Rancher 2 Advanced Viewer, which allows you to see hidden stats like fatigue, stress, lifespan, future shop sales, and other useful information the game doesn't tell you. Legend Cup also has some very useful maps and item lists for expeditions, complete with paths for optimal treasure gains. There's also lists of techniques for every species, schedule planners, and of course the previously mentioned combination calculator. A lot of the previously mentioned creators of these tools are active in the r/Monster Rancher Discord group, and they've always been very knowledgeable people when it comes to the game. Monster Rancher 2, being the most popular game in the series by far, has had a lot of effort spent in understanding it. I doubt there's Western players out there who know more than they do. A lot of the community tournaments are organized by people in this Discord as well, and while Koei Tecmo has begun hosting official tournaments since the DX release, these guys have been doing it themselves for years. There are fan wikis, but I hesitate to recommend them for info since there's a lot of entries that could be described as, well, fanfiction. But yeah, the community here is pretty great. If I have seen far when it comes to Monster Rancher, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of golems. And with that, I think it's time for a final conclusion. As a game, Monster Rancher 2 is pretty incredible. To bring up a source I've used before, the executive producer for Monster Rancher during the original releases, as well as DX, Kazumi Fujita, has made a few statements that reveal his intentions behind the game. I'll link the same interviews as the Monster Rancher 1 video since his quotes are related to the DX releases containing MR1 and 2 together. To paraphrase, Fujita obviously wants players to develop a fondness for their monsters and grow attached to them as the player cares for them. As we've already discussed, the monsters in Monster Rancher 2 ooze personality, making it easy for your screen to fall away and see them as a real, living thing. The responsibility of caring for them is evident in the game's mechanics, since the player is tasked with managing their monster's fatigue, stress, loyalty, and other factors. The mistakes come at the cost of the most valuable resource each monster has, their lifespan. Rewards for properly caring for your monster allow the player to ascend in the ranks and acquire resources in the form of gold and items, not to mention unlocking more of the buggers themselves. Since the player is dependent on their monster to complete the challenges of the game, they are helping themselves by responsibly managing their monster's various stats. I guess the word for this would be skill expression, but the skill being tested is largely knowledge-based. Like sure, the combat requires some physical coordination and strategy, but most of how the player performs comes from their knowledge of the game's mechanics. That and the knowledge of how to efficiently use or exploit them. Examples include learning to minimize battles and lifespan loss in general, building an effective stat build for your monster based on their strengths and weaknesses, and building your resources through play. This could refer to gold, items, unlocked monsters, or even upgrades to techniques and your ranch. So in terms of execution, Monster Rancher 2 is largely successful in endearing players to their monster. That is ultimately a subjective reaction from the player, but we can see there are measurable mechanical elements of game design that make such a reaction easier to elicit in players. There are, of course, parts of the game that could have used improvement. The lack of direct knowledge given to the player on certain subjects permeates the game. This lack of knowledge can annoy, like the pointless drill rankings that only punish the player, or they can mislead the player on their performance, such as combining all lost lifespan into a single monster is stressed out message and expecting monsters to only live 3 or 4 years. Once I learned how much lifespan I was actually losing on my monsters each month, I changed my playstyle significantly. But to learn about this required seeing the info through a fan-made tool. And yes, there are the genuinely terrible AI versus AI battles, the sluggish and templated animations, and the awful translation. These are definitely flaws, as I pointed out. But the game still has more than enough good qualities about it to make up for them. In fact, if you've seen my video on Monster Rancher 1, you'll probably notice I've repeated many of the same points, both good and bad. This is because Monster Rancher 2, overall, is a fantastic sequel. When it comes to judging a sequel, my mindset is to use the first installment as a baseline for overall quality. Usually I define a good sequel as a game that improves or expands upon the previous game or games. It also minimizes or outright avoids any negative changes made between games. Since Monster Rancher 1 exists, we can properly define what the core experience of a Monster Rancher game is and compare later games to what is already established. So I'll say a core Monster Rancher game involves raising a monster's stats through making a training routine, entering them in combat tournaments against other monsters, combining them to make stronger offspring, and forming bonds with your monster through one-on-one care and attention. That seems like a fair definition, no? Then, in comparison, we can conclude that Monster Rancher 2 expands on Monster Rancher 1. You've got a ton of new monsters, the expedition maps have been made denser with points of interest, pathways, and obstacles. There's more types of tournaments, more items, and more characters. The scope of the lore and the world building have also been expanded. Sometimes, like with the AI battles, these elements are not always good, but it's undeniable that Monster Rancher 2 is a much bigger game. The solid mechanics of the previous game are pretty intact, with most of the changes being improvements. Loyalty is no longer a guaranteed stat, you have to work to maintain your monster's loyalty. Stress and fatigue require more attention from the player to manage this time around. Gold peaches can't be given to one monster repeatedly, which means you can't make a monster immortal, sure, but I think it's more in the spirit of making the most out of your monster's life. This makes the game certainly more difficult than its predecessor, but in a good way. And of course, as you learn about the game, you can find the opportunities to make the game your bitch. Do I wish the developers carried over aspects like monster models physically growing with age, or each species having its own unique training animations? Sure. But these don't really detract from Monster Rancher 2 all that much. To be honest, a lot of the problems like important information being hidden from the player aren't improved or made worse. That problem is largely just the same. There are many cases out there with shows, games, or other media where a sequel drastically tries to reinvent itself or change too much, losing what made the original appealing in the first place. I'm happy to say Monster Rancher 2 is not one of those. While I have a lot of fondness for Monster Rancher 1, the second game is without a doubt the stronger of the two in terms of overall quality. There's a reason why, of the two, it has the most people picking it apart. Again, I have no nostalgia bias for this game. Unlike many fans, I never played Monster Rancher 2 until I was maybe 26, so by looking at it as unbiased as I can be, I think it's pretty fantastic. While I might be jumping the gun by a few future videos, I would argue it is the strongest game in the series. Though the disclaimer here is that this series is definitely not for everyone. The game is so much about following a routine and preparing your monster. The deferral of gratification until potentially hours later when your monster begins to exercise their might seem dreadfully dull or tedious to some. Combined with the routines, this game is certainly the hardest of the mainline series to get into, at least I think so. I haven't played Evo yet, so there's that caveat. But like I said before, Monster Rancher 2 just requires a noticeably stricter management of your monster's fatigue and stress. Regardless, Monster Rancher 2 is a fucking awesome game. Whether it's through the original game or the DX edition, I highly recommend it. Just know what you're getting into. But yes, that's all for now. I hope you've enjoyed watching or listening, as I have very much enjoyed going through this game with a fine comb. This next section is just going to be updates about future stuff, so if you're just here for Monster Rancher 2, I don't blame you for tapping out. If you want to support this channel, do feel free to like and subscribe, all that algorithm YouTube stuff. I also have a Patreon and Subscribestar if you're interested in direct financial support. Links are in the description. I'd especially like to thank Patrick and Malin for their stalwart support during these difficult months of this video's creation. First off, apologies for this being so late. I've entered into a new job, and it's somewhat of a monkey's paw. Overtime is inevitable, so I can prepare for the future better, but that means less free time to do this. The job is pretty physically exhausting too, so finding the energy can sometimes be tough. Our daughter is doing great though. Healthy, laughs all the time, and close to being able to crawl now. This script was the longest I've ever made actually, since I went ahead and covered MR2 more deeply than MR1. The next game I'd like to tackle is Spectrobes. It's been more than a decade since I've done a playthrough, and it'll be nice to do a game that I have an actual history with. Do look forward to that. Before I do a little ending Q&A, I just want to say thank you all for giving a shit about what I do. At time of writing, I see 421 people subscribed. Imagine that, over 421 people that like your stuff enough to want to keep tabs on you making them. It's honestly humbling. I hope you all have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one. What was your favorite monster you raised while making this video? Probably this pixie centaur I had named Simtrina. I was honestly frustrated at her performance at first, but she ended up being the monster I beat the Major 4 with first on this save. Originally, I was just raising her as a way to build up money. It warms me heart to be proven wrong so soundly when a monster ends up exceeding your expectations. The DX version of MR2 is based off the Japanese release of the game. As such, it disables the ability to skip drill animations as well as shortens all the monsters' lifespans by 100 weeks compared to the NA release. If you are familiar enough with the DX version to comment on this, I'd like to hear what you think of these differences. I explained a bit about this before I got to this question, but I don't mind repeating. I personally didn't notice a difference since any unavoidable lifespan hits are a lot less punishing now. I'm sure if someone did a lot of testing and math, the two games would be different up close, but nothing a natural playstyle should encounter. What do you think about the Ultra Kaiju Monster Rancher game? You may have covered this elsewhere, but what's your favorite Monster Tamer game? I haven't actually played it yet, but it goes without saying that the interest is there. I've honestly got a sizable backlog of games I'm slowly getting through. Such is the life of an RPG fan. To answer your other question, Pokemon will always be near and dear to my heart, but in the last couple of years, the Shin Megami Tensei series has turned into an absolute crack addiction for me. It's a complete "this hole was made for me" kind of feeling. Disc Creatures has also earned a top spot too.